There is a quiet moment late at night when your eyes feel heavy and your thoughts slow down, and suddenly something unbelievable sounds reasonable. You know that feeling, the moment when a headline that would normally make you laugh just slides right in. The moment when a comforting explanation feels better than a complicated truth. That is not you being stupid. That is your brain switching priorities. Before we continue, a quick note. Many of you watch our videos, but haven't subscribed yet. So please subscribe to our channel Restwise and join our growing community. We'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's amazing to see how connected we all are. If you enjoy relaxing with philosophy, psychology, and science while drifting into sleep, give this video a like and stay with us on the journey. Now, let's get back to the video. Here is the unsettling part. When you are exhausted, your brain is not searching for what is accurate. It is searching for what is soothing. Truth takes effort. Comfort feels like rest. And the brain, when tired, will choose rest almost every time. This is why obvious lies spread fastest at night. This is why you can fall asleep believing something you would dismantle in seconds the next morning. Exhaustion does not just make you slower. It makes you softer. Your brain runs on limited energy. The part responsible for critical thinking and skepticism sits in the front, the prefrontal cortex. That area is like a manager who keeps everyone in line. When you are well rested, it checks claims, looks for inconsistencies, and asks annoying questions. But when you are tired, that manager clocks out early. What stays active are the emotional and instinctive systems, the parts that want safety, familiarity, and relief. This is not a metaphor. Brain imaging shows reduced activity in the areas linked to logic and increased reliance on emotional shortcuts during fatigue. Think about how children accept stories without question right before bed. That same openness returns when adults are drained. The mind slips into a suggestible state. It stops arguing and starts accepting. If an idea feels calm or reassuring, it gets a pass. If it challenges your worldview or demands effort, it gets postponed or ignored. Comfort becomes the filter. This is why conspiracy theories and oversimplified explanations feel so tempting when you are worn down. They offer a sense of order. They say, do not worry. Here is the reason. Here is the villain. Here is the solution. No thinking required. The tired brain loves that. It wants the world to make sense quickly so it can rest. Complexity is exhausting. Nuance feels like noise. You have probably noticed this in yourself. When you are exhausted, you are more likely to agree just to end the conversation. More likely to say, maybe you are right, even when you are not convinced. More likely to scroll past something that challenges you and linger on something that confirms what you already feel. That is not weakness. That is conservation. Psychologists call this cognitive miserliness. The brain spends effort like currency. When reserves are low, it becomes cheap. It grabs the first explanation that feels good enough. Studies on sleep deprivation show that people rely more heavily on heuristics and emotional cues when tired. They judge truth based on familiarity rather than evidence. If something sounds familiar, it feels true. Repetition becomes proof. This also explains why comforting lies often survive longer than uncomfortable truths. Truth can be lonely. It can feel cold. Lies, especially obvious ones, are often wrapped in warmth. They say you are safe, you are right, you do not need to change. When you are exhausted, that warmth matters more than accuracy. The brain is not trying to deceive you. It is trying to protect you from overload. There is something deeply human about this. Your nervous system evolved to keep you alive, not informed. When energy is low, survival mode kicks in. Reduce conflict. Reduce effort. Reduce uncertainty. Accept what soothes, reject what disturbs. In a strange way, believing a gentle lie can feel like self-care when you are drained. But here is the quiet danger. The things you accept when tired do not always disappear when you wake up. They linger. They become background assumptions. And because you did not actively choose them, you rarely question them later. This is how exhaustion shapes belief without asking permission. If you have ever wondered why your opinions feel different at night, or why clarity returns in the morning, this is why. Your brain has two modes, one that seeks truth and one that seeks comfort. Exhaustion flips the switch, and once you see that switch, you start noticing how often it gets pulled, not just by lack of sleep, but by stress, emotional burnout, and constant noise. Anywhere your mental energy is drained, comfort starts winning. What matters is not judging yourself for it. What matters is recognizing when your brain is tired and deciding not to let it sign off on big beliefs in that state. Because the ideas you fall asleep with have a strange way of waking up with you. Why familiar lies feel safer than uncertain truths. You do not cling to familiar lies because you are foolish. You cling to them because they feel like home. Even when they hurt you, even when part of you knows something is off. There is a strange calm in believing something you already recognize, even if it is wrong. Your body relaxes. Your breathing slows. Your mind stops scanning for danger. Familiarity whispers you have been here before and you survived. What most people do not realize is that uncertainty triggers the same systems in the brain as physical threat. When you do not know what is true, your nervous system stays alert. Muscles tense, thoughts race. Your brain hates that state. It burns energy. So when a familiar explanation shows up, even a false one, your brain grabs it like a life raft. At least this story has edges. At least it has a shape. The uncomfortable truth is that lies often feel safer than facts because facts do not promise stability. Truth sometimes says we do not know yet. Truth admits gaps. Truth leaves room for change. Lies close the door. They say this is how it is and how it will stay. For a brain wired to predict and prepare, closure feels like safety. There is a powerful mechanism behind this called predictive processing. Your brain is constantly trying to guess what will happen next. It builds internal models of reality and updates them when new information arrives. But updating costs energy. It means admitting the old model was wrong. When a belief is familiar, your brain can reuse it without effort. When a truth challenges it, the brain has to rebuild. That rebuild feels like danger. This is why people often defend beliefs more fiercely when they are uncertain inside. The belief is not just an idea. It is a stabilizer. Removing it would make the world feel unpredictable, and unpredictability feels unsafe, especially when you are already tired or stressed. Think about how people stick with explanations they grew up with, even after being shown evidence that contradicts them. The familiar lie does not just explain the world. It explains their place in it. It tells them who they are, who to trust, and what to expect. An uncertain truth threatens all of that at once. Your brain also confuses repetition with reliability. The more often you hear something, the more fluent it feels. Fluency creates the sensation of truth, not because it is accurate, but because it is easy to process. Studies show that repeated false statements are more likely to be judged as true over time, simply because they feel familiar. The brain mistakes ease for accuracy. This is especially dangerous late at night or during emotional exhaustion. In those states, your brain lowers its standards. It stops asking, "Is this correct?" and starts asking, "Does this feel stable?" Familiar lies usually pass that test instantly. Uncertain truths rarely do. There is also a social layer to this. Familiar lies are often shared. They connect you to a group. Believing them can feel like belonging. Uncertain truths can isolate you. They put you in the uncomfortable position of saying, "I am not sure," or "I need more time." Humans are social creatures. Safety is not just physical. It is relational. Sometimes a lie feels safer because it keeps you inside the circle. You may have noticed this when you hesitated to challenge something everyone around you accepted. Even if you had doubts, staying quiet felt safer. That is not cowardice. That is your social brain choosing connection over accuracy. Evolution rewarded belonging long before it rewarded being right. Here is the part that stings. Familiar lies do not just feel safe. They actively calm the nervous system. They reduce uncertainty, which lowers stress hormones. Uncertain truths keep cortisol elevated. They demand patience. They say, "Sit with discomfort." Most brains would rather not. So when someone offers a clean story with clear villains and simple answers, your brain exhales. Finally, something solid. Even if that solidity is fake. But safety based on illusion is fragile. It only works as long as reality does not push back. And reality always does. When it does, the shock is worse because the belief felt so stable. That is why people can react so emotionally when a familiar lie is challenged. It feels like the ground moving under their feet. Understanding this changes how you see belief. It stops being about intelligence and starts being about regulation, about energy, about safety. People are not choosing lies because they want to be wrong. They are choosing them because their nervous system wants rest. And once you realize that, you can start noticing when something feels true simply because it feels familiar. That moment of warmth, that sense of relief, that quiet comfort. Sometimes that feeling is not truth arriving. Sometimes it is just uncertainty leaving. The unsettling question is not why lies feel safe. It is how many of the things you believe right now feel true only because they have been with you for a long time. Cognitive dissonance as a natural sleep aid. There is a strange relief that comes right before sleep when your mind finally stops fighting itself. Not because everything makes sense, but because you stop trying to make it make sense. That moment when two conflicting ideas exist in your head, and instead of resolving them, you just let them blur together. That is not failure. That is cognitive dissonance doing its quiet work. Cognitive dissonance sounds like something negative, like mental friction you are supposed to eliminate. But your brain did not evolve to eliminate it completely. It evolved to manage it. And when you are tired, management turns into sedation. The brain uses unresolved contradictions the same way it uses white noise to soften sharp edges, to lull itself into rest. Here is the uncomfortable truth. When you are exhausted, resolving contradictions costs too much energy. Choosing one belief over another requires attention, analysis, and emotional risk. So instead, your brain chooses a third option. It lets both exist without interrogation. That unresolved tension actually reduces effort. It says we will deal with this later. Later becomes morning. Sleep arrives. This is why you can fall asleep believing two things that clearly contradict each other. You can think the world is unfair and still believe everything happens for a reason. You can believe you deserve better and still accept less. During the day, those ideas clash. At night, they coexist peacefully. The brain stops policing consistency because consistency is work. Neurologically, this makes sense. As you get tired, the prefrontal cortex loses dominance. That is the part that enforces logic and coherence. Meanwhile, the default mode network becomes more active. That network is associated with daydreaming, memory blending, and loose associations. It does not care if ideas match. It cares if they feel familiar and emotionally tolerable. Cognitive dissonance becomes soothing because it removes the pressure to decide. Decision fatigue is real. Every choice drains glucose and attention. When you are exhausted, even choosing what to believe feels heavy. Letting conflicting beliefs sit unresolved feels lighter. Your brain takes the path of least resistance straight into sleep. Think about how often you replay something painful at night, but never finish the thought. You circle it. You soften it. You tell yourself two opposite stories at once. It hurts, but it also numbs. That numbness is not accidental. It is your nervous system applying anesthesia. Psychologists have found that people experiencing high cognitive dissonance often seek distractions or rationalizations rather than resolution, especially under stress. At night, sleep itself becomes the distraction. Instead of fixing the contradiction, the brain suspends it. Suspension reduces arousal. Reduced arousal allows sleep. This is why comforting rationalizations appear right before bed. Maybe it was meant to be. Maybe it does not matter. Maybe tomorrow will be different. These thoughts do not resolve the issue. They quiet it. They lower emotional volume. The brain is not lying to you. It is tucking you in. There is also a chemical component. Unresolved dissonance maintains moderate dopamine activity, enough to keep thoughts moving, not enough to trigger action. That middle state is perfect for drifting off. Too much clarity would provoke change. Too much anxiety would keep you awake. Cognitive dissonance balances on the edge. This explains why some people sleep better when they avoid hard truths. Facing a painful reality demands integration. Integration demands effort. Avoidance allows contradiction to persist without cost. The brain rewards avoidance with rest. But here is where it gets tricky. Because the brain learns. If avoiding resolution leads to sleep, the brain associates unresolved dissonance with safety. Over time, it may prefer confusion over clarity. Not consciously, but biologically. Comfort becomes linked to not knowing. You may have noticed this pattern. The nights you challenge your beliefs are restless. The nights you accept vague explanations are easier. That is not coincidence. That is conditioning. This does not mean cognitive dissonance is bad. It means it is powerful. It can protect you from overload. It can help you survive periods when you cannot act yet, but it can also keep you stuck if it becomes your primary coping mechanism. The brain loves temporary solutions that feel permanent. Cognitive dissonance is one of them. It says you do not need to choose right now, and right now is all the tired brain cares about. Understanding this reframes how you see your nighttime thoughts. They are not philosophical conclusions. They are sedatives. They are mental pillows. They are stories shaped less by truth and more by the need to rest. So when you find yourself accepting contradictions late at night, do not judge it. Notice it. Your brain is doing what it knows how to do best under exhaustion. It is buying you sleep at the cost of clarity. The question that lingers is not whether cognitive dissonance helps you sleep. It clearly does. The deeper question is how many of the beliefs you carry into the morning were never meant to be permanent, only comfortable enough to close your eyes. Reassuring narratives reduce existential anxiety. There is a moment when the lights are off and the room is quiet, and your mind suddenly remembers how vast everything is, how small you are inside it, how little control you really have. That is usually when the discomfort creeps in. Not fear exactly, more like a hollow pressure in the chest. And almost instantly, a story appears to soften it. A reason, a meaning, a narrative that says this all adds up somehow. That relief is not accidental. Reassuring narratives are one of the brain's oldest tools for calming existential anxiety. When faced with questions it cannot answer, like why we are here or what happens after we are gone, the brain does not default to truth. It defaults to comfort. It looks for a story that lets the nervous system stand down. Existential anxiety is not just philosophical unease. It is a physiological state. When the mind confronts uncertainty about meaning, mortality, or purpose, the amygdala reacts as if there is a threat. Heart rate increases. Muscles tighten. Thoughts loop. The brain treats not knowing as danger, and danger demands resolution. Here is where reassuring narratives step in. They offer emotional closure without requiring evidence. They say there is a plan, there is justice, there is order behind the chaos. Whether those narratives are religious, cultural, personal, or even cynical does not matter. What matters is that they reduce uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty calms the body. Psychologists studying terror management theory found that reminders of mortality increase people's attachment to belief systems that give life meaning. When death becomes salient, people cling harder to stories that say their existence matters, not because those stories are proven, but because they regulate fear. Meaning acts like a tranquilizer. Think about how often people turn to phrases like "everything happens for a reason" or "it will all make sense someday." These statements do not explain anything. They soothe. They take an overwhelming question and wrap it in reassurance. The brain exhales. The nervous system relaxes. That relief feels like truth, even though it is really regulation. At night, this effect intensifies. Fatigue lowers your tolerance for ambiguity. You do not have the energy to stare into the unknown. So the brain offers narratives that close the loop. Stories that say you are part of something larger. Stories that say suffering is temporary or purposeful. Stories that say you are not alone in the void. Neuroscience backs this up. The brain is a prediction machine. It hates gaps. When it cannot predict outcomes, anxiety rises. Reassuring narratives reduce prediction error. They give the brain a framework, even a fictional one, to organize experience. Once the framework is in place, uncertainty drops. Anxiety follows. This is why even bleak narratives can be comforting if they are coherent. A story that says life is meaningless but predictable can feel safer than one that says meaning is unknown. The brain prefers a dark map over no map at all. At least with a map, it knows where the edges are. You see this in how people respond to randomness. Random suffering is terrifying. Suffering with a story attached feels tolerable. The narrative does not remove pain, but it gives it a container. Containers make things easier to hold. There is also a social dimension. Reassuring narratives are often shared. Believing them connects you to others who believe the same thing. That sense of belonging further reduces existential fear. Isolation amplifies anxiety. Shared meaning dampens it, even if the meaning itself is questionable. This is why challenging someone's core narrative can feel like an attack on their nervous system. You are not just questioning an idea. You are removing a coping mechanism. Without the narrative, the anxiety rushes back in. The body reacts before the mind can reason. It is important to understand this because it changes how you see belief. Beliefs are not just intellectual positions. They are emotional regulators. They help people sleep. They help people function. They help people get through the day without being overwhelmed by the weight of existence. Late at night, when defenses are down, the brain leans even harder on these stories. It repeats them like lullabies. You matter. This is meaningful. There is order here. These thoughts lower arousal. Cortisol drops. The body prepares for rest. But there is a trade-off. Reassuring narratives can delay confrontation with uncertainty. They can keep deeper questions at bay. Sometimes that is necessary. Sometimes it is protective. Sometimes it prevents growth. The brain does not care which. It cares about survival. And survival often means not staring too long into the abyss. This does not mean all reassuring narratives are false. It means their emotional power often exceeds their evidential strength. They feel true because they calm you, not because they are verified. That feeling of calm gets mislabeled as certainty. Once you recognize this, you start noticing when a belief shows up primarily to soothe anxiety. You feel it in the body first. The easing, the grounding, the sense of being held. That sensation can be beautiful. It can also be misleading. Reassuring narratives are not proof of meaning. They are responses to fear of meaninglessness. They are psychological shelter. And when you are tired, vulnerable, and alone with your thoughts, shelter can feel indistinguishable from truth. The role of denial in emotional self-preservation. Denial does not show up loudly. It does not announce itself as a defense. It feels more like relief, like finally being able to breathe after holding your breath too long. You are not thinking I am denying this. You are thinking I cannot deal with this right now. And that distinction matters because denial is not about lying to yourself. It is about keeping yourself intact. Most people imagine denial as stupidity or avoidance, but psychologically, it is closer to emergency medicine. When something is too painful, too destabilizing, or too overwhelming to process all at once, the brain steps in and limits exposure. Not because the truth is false, but because it is too sharp. Denial dulls the edge just enough for you to keep functioning. Here is the uncomfortable shock. If humans were forced to emotionally process every painful truth the moment it appeared, most would collapse. Denial is not a flaw in the system. It is part of the system. It buys time. It keeps the nervous system from overload. Without it, emotional survival would be impossible. The brain treats emotional pain very similarly to physical pain. Both activate threat circuits. Both demand protection. When pain exceeds coping capacity, the brain activates defenses. Denial is one of the fastest and most efficient. It simply blocks the signal from reaching full awareness. You are not erasing reality. You are lowering the volume. This is why denial often appears after trauma, loss, betrayal, or major life disruption. In those moments, reality changes too fast. Your identity, your expectations, your sense of safety all fracture at once. The brain cannot integrate that much information immediately. So it narrows focus. It says this part is not real yet. We will come back to it. Studies on stress and trauma show that denial can reduce acute anxiety and physiological arousal in the short term. Heart rate lowers. Cortisol drops. The body stabilizes. From a survival standpoint, this is a win. You cannot process grief while you are in shock. You cannot rebuild meaning while you are flooded. Think about how people respond to devastating diagnoses or sudden losses. The first reaction is often disbelief. This cannot be happening. That response is not ignorance. It is a buffer. It gives the psyche space to slowly adjust to a new reality instead of shattering under it. Denial also protects identity. Many truths do not just hurt, they threaten who you think you are. Admitting them would require rewriting your story. That rewrite is emotionally expensive, so the brain postpones it. It says this information does not fit yet. Not because it never will, but because right now, fitting it in would break the structure. You can see this in relationships. When someone realizes they are being mistreated, the truth often arrives in fragments. They explain it away. They minimize it. They focus on the good moments. This is not weakness. It is self-preservation. Accepting the full truth might mean accepting loneliness, failure, or loss. Denial keeps the door closed until the person is strong enough to open it. There is also a biological reason denial feels calming. When the brain blocks threatening information, it reduces activation in the limbic system. Less emotional intensity means less stress. The body relaxes. That relaxation feels like safety, and safety feels like correctness. This is why denial can feel so convincing. It is reinforced by relief. Late at night or during exhaustion, denial becomes even more tempting. Energy is low. Emotional regulation is fragile. The brain does not have the resources to confront hard truths, so it leans harder on defenses. It says not now, tomorrow, later, sleep first. This is where denial overlaps with belief. The mind may accept explanations that soften reality, rationalizations, optimistic distortions, selective attention. These are not random errors. They are tools designed to reduce pain quickly. But denial has limits. It is meant to be temporary. A cast, not a replacement for healing. When denial becomes chronic, it stops being protective and starts being restrictive. The brain keeps blocking information even when the person is capable of handling it. Growth stalls. Patterns repeat. The tricky part is that denial does not announce when it has overstayed its welcome. It still feels comforting. It still lowers anxiety. The cost shows up elsewhere. In numbness, in stuckness, in a quiet sense that something is off. Understanding denial as self-preservation changes how you relate to it. Instead of judging it, you can ask what it is protecting you from. What truth feels too heavy right now? What part of you is not ready yet? That curiosity creates space. Psychologists emphasize that integration happens gradually. The brain introduces painful truths in doses. Denial fades when safety increases, when support appears, when capacity grows. You cannot force awareness. You can only build the conditions where it becomes tolerable. This is why confronting someone in denial rarely works. You are not just challenging an idea. You are threatening their sense of safety. The nervous system responds with resistance. The denial tightens, not because they are stubborn, but because they feel exposed. The same applies internally. If you try to rip away your own defenses, the system pushes back. Healing is not about ripping. It is about allowing truth to surface when the body can hold it. Denial is not the enemy of truth. It is the gatekeeper. It decides when truth can enter without destroying the structure. Sometimes it opens slowly, sometimes all at once, sometimes not yet. Recognizing this does not mean staying asleep. It means respecting the intelligence of your own mind. The part of you that chose survival first. And when you notice yourself pushing something away, minimizing or avoiding, instead of forcing clarity, you can acknowledge the function. Something here hurts. Something here matters. Something here is being protected. That awareness alone loosens denial's grip, because denial thrives in shame and disappears in understanding. The real question is not why you deny certain truths. The real question is what pain you survived by doing so. and whether you are finally safe enough to let a little more reality in. How repetition turns falsehoods into bedtime stories. At some point late at night, you have probably noticed your mind drifting back to the same idea again. Not because it is new or insightful, but because it feels familiar, almost comforting. Like a story you have heard so many times you no longer question it. That is how repetition works. It does not convince you by force. It wears you down gently until disbelief feels unnecessary. Here is the unsettling reality. The human brain does not decide truth based on accuracy as much as it decides based on familiarity. When an idea repeats itself enough times, it starts to feel safe, predictable, known. And when you are tired, safety matters more than verification. So the falsehood slips past your defenses and settles in like a bedtime story. This is not about intelligence. It is about how the brain processes information. Every time you hear something, neural pathways strengthen. The brain literally becomes better at recognizing and retrieving that idea. Over time, familiarity creates fluency. Fluency feels like truth, not because it is correct, but because it is easy to process. The brain confuses ease with accuracy. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. When people are exposed to repeated false statements, they are more likely to rate them as true later, even when they know the statements were false initially. The repetition does not change the facts. It changes the feeling. And feelings guide belief far more than we like to admit. Think about how children fall asleep to the same story night after night. The repetition is soothing. There are no surprises. The ending is known. The nervous system relaxes because nothing unexpected is coming. Adults are not that different. We just replace fairy tales with explanations about the world, ourselves, and other people. When a falsehood is repeated often enough, it stops feeling like information and starts feeling like background noise. It becomes part of the mental environment. You are not actively believing it anymore. You are resting in it. Questioning it would require effort. And at night, effort is exactly what the brain is trying to avoid. This is why repeated narratives are so powerful during exhaustion. Critical thinking requires energy. Skepticism requires attention. When those resources are depleted, the brain relies on shortcuts. One of the strongest shortcuts is familiarity. If you have heard something many times, the brain assumes it has been vetted already. It trusts the crowd of past exposures. There is also an emotional layer. Repetition reduces uncertainty. The first time you hear an idea, your brain asks questions. The 10th time, it stops. The questions feel redundant. That silence feels peaceful. Peace gets mistaken for certainty. This is how obvious falsehoods survive. They are not aggressive. They are persistent. They show up in conversations, media, internal dialogue. Each exposure is small, almost harmless. But together, they build a sense of inevitability. Of course this is true. I have heard it everywhere. Late at night, this effect deepens. Fatigue lowers resistance. The mind becomes more passive. Ideas flow in without much filtering. Repeated beliefs feel like old friends. Even if they are wrong, they feel familiar. Familiar feels safe. Safe feels right. You might notice this when scrolling before sleep. The same themes appear again and again. The same explanations. The same simplified takes. Eventually, they stop feeling like opinions and start feeling like reality. Not because you evaluated them, but because you absorbed them repeatedly. The brain loves efficiency. It wants to reduce effort wherever possible. Repetition allows it to outsource thinking. Why analyze something you have already heard so many times? That analysis feels unnecessary. and unnecessary effort is the enemy of sleep. There is also a memory component. Repeated information is easier to recall. When something comes to mind quickly, the brain assumes it is important and true. Difficulty retrieving information feels like doubt. Ease feels like confidence. Repetition creates ease. This is why lies told often enough feel like they have always been true. They blend into memory. You stop remembering where you heard them. You stop remembering that they were ever questioned. They feel self-evident. This process is not malicious. It is automatic. The brain did not evolve to fact-check every repeated signal. It evolved to notice patterns. Repetition signals reliability in nature. If something keeps appearing, it usually matters. The brain applies that rule even when it should not. Bedtime is the perfect entry point for this mechanism. As the body prepares for rest, the brain shifts into consolidation mode. It strengthens what feels familiar. It smooths over inconsistencies. It organizes information based on repetition and emotional tone, not accuracy. This is why the thoughts you fall asleep with can feel strangely solid in the morning. They were rehearsed. Rehearsal strengthens belief. Sleep locks it in. But here is the twist. Repetition does not just make falsehoods feel true. It makes them feel harmless. Familiar ideas do not trigger alarm. They slide under the radar. That is what makes them dangerous. You do not defend against what feels like a lullaby. Once you see this, you start noticing how often the same explanations repeat in your life. The stories you tell yourself about who you are, about what is possible, about what never changes. Some of those stories may be comforting. Some may be limiting. Their power does not come from evidence. It comes from rehearsal. Understanding this does not mean you must reject everything familiar. It means you become aware of the mechanism. You notice when something feels true mainly because it has been repeated. That awareness creates a pause. Repetition is not proof. It is persuasion by exhaustion. It works best when you are tired, distracted, or seeking comfort. That is why falsehoods make such good bedtime stories. They do not ask to be believed. They ask to be remembered. And the more often you let them tuck you in, the more they start feeling like part of the truth you wake up with. Social validation makes lies easier to accept. It rarely begins with you being convinced. It begins with you noticing how relaxed everyone else seems. No panic, no resistance, just nods, agreement, casual confidence, and something in you softens. Your body reads the room before your mind reads the claim. If everyone else is calm, your nervous system decides this must be safe. That is where belief quietly starts. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Humans do not evaluate ideas in isolation. We evaluate them socially. Long before we ask, is this true? Our brain asks, am I alone if I question this? And when the answer feels like yes, most of us hesitate. Not because we lack intelligence, but because we are wired for connection. Social validation is one of the strongest forces shaping belief. When a lie is shared, repeated, and accepted by a group, it stops feeling like a lie. It feels like shared reality. The brain treats consensus as a shortcut. Many people agree equals low risk. Low risk equals safety. Safety feels good. And whatever feels good starts to feel true. Neurologically, this makes sense. Social rejection activates the same pain circuits as physical injury. Being excluded hurts. Alignment relieves that pain. So when you accept what others accept, your body relaxes. That relaxation is not logic, it is regulation. But the brain often confuses the two. You have felt this before. You had a doubt, a hesitation, a question. But no one else seemed bothered, so you second-guessed yourself. Maybe I am overthinking. Maybe I am wrong. That shift did not come from evidence. It came from the fear of standing apart. When you are exhausted, this effect intensifies. Fatigue weakens your internal compass. Your confidence drops. Your tolerance for conflict shrinks. Generating your own conclusions feels heavy. Borrowing certainty from others feels effortless, so you lean outward. You let the group think for you. Psychologists call this normative influence. People conform not because they believe the group is correct, but because they want to belong. Accuracy takes a back seat to acceptance. At night, when energy is low, acceptance becomes even more valuable. You want peace, you want rest. Agreement offers both. Social validation also creates the illusion of inevitability. If everyone believes something, questioning it feels pointless, like pushing against gravity. That resignation feels calming. Calm again masquerades as truth. This is why numbers matter so much. Likes, shares, comments, applause. They act as social proof. Your brain reads them as signals of safety. This many people cannot be wrong. But that is not reasoning. That is herd logic. Useful for survival. Dangerous for truth. There is also a trust transfer happening. If you trust the group, you start trusting its beliefs. Belonging comes with an invisible contract. Accept the shared narrative and you stay connected. Question it and you risk distance. For a social brain, distance feels like danger. This is how lies spread so efficiently. Not through force, but through warmth. Through familiarity. Through the comfort of agreement. You are not just accepting an idea. You are maintaining a bond. The brain will protect bonds before it protects facts. Late at night, this becomes even more powerful. You replay conversations. You remember what people agreed on, what felt shared. Those socially validated ideas feel warmer than your private doubts. So you let the doubts fade. Sleep comes easier when you feel aligned, even if the alignment is imagined. Studies on conformity show that people will knowingly give incorrect answers if everyone else does. The discomfort of being alone outweighs the discomfort of being wrong. That discomfort lives in the body, not the intellect. Social validation also dulls warning signals. When a belief is shared, it feels less threatening, even if it should raise alarms. Shared danger feels less dangerous. That is how extreme ideas become normalized. Familiarity plus agreement equals comfort. This does not mean consensus is always wrong. Shared knowledge can be powerful. But when agreement replaces evaluation, belief stops being about truth and starts being about safety. The tired brain is especially vulnerable to this. It wants cues. It wants to know where to stand so it can rest. If everyone else is standing somewhere, it joins them. That decision is about energy conservation, not accuracy. Here is the validating part. This happens to everyone. Intelligence does not immunize you. Awareness barely slows it down. Social validation operates at a nervous system level. It calms fear of exclusion. That calm feels right. The brain learns quickly what feels right. The danger is subtle. Lies accepted through social validation rarely feel like lies. They feel like common sense. They feel obvious. Questioning them feels strange, even internally. Once you notice this, you start paying attention to how your certainty changes in groups. How agreement strengthens belief. How disagreement weakens it. That shift is not about facts. It is about belonging. And when you are tired, craving rest, craving connection, the line between truth and comfort blurs. Social validation turns lies into something soft enough to lean on. Something shared. Something easy to fall asleep believing. Authority figures as emotional sedatives. There is a particular calm that washes over you when someone confident takes control. You feel it when a voice sounds certain, steady, unbothered. Your chest loosens. Your thoughts slow down. Even before you understand what they are saying, part of you relaxes simply because they sound like they know. That reaction is not accidental. Authority has a sedative effect on the human nervous system. From an early age, your brain learns a simple equation. Authority equals safety. Parents, teachers, doctors, leaders. When they speak, you are trained to listen, not just with your ears but with your body. Their certainty signals that someone else is carrying the weight of decision-making. You no longer have to. That relief is powerful. Here is the uncomfortable part. Authority does not just guide behavior. It bypasses critical thinking. When an authority figure speaks, the brain often skips the question, "Is this true?" and jumps straight to "This must be handled." Handled feels like resolved. Resolved feels calming. Calm gets mistaken for correctness. Psychologically, this is rooted in cognitive offloading. The brain conserves energy by outsourcing complex judgments to trusted figures. Instead of analyzing every claim yourself, you rely on someone perceived as knowledgeable or powerful to do it for you. That shortcut is efficient. It is also dangerous when authority is wrong or manipulative. Neuroscience shows that authoritative cues reduce activity in regions associated with skepticism and increase compliance. The brain interprets authority as structure. Structure reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty creates anxiety. Remove uncertainty and the nervous system settles. This is why authoritative lies are easier to accept than uncertain truths. A confident falsehood feels safer than a hesitant fact. A calm voice saying everything is under control can quiet fear faster than an honest admission of complexity. When the goal is emotional regulation, clarity matters less than certainty. You see this clearly during times of stress, crisis, illness, exhaustion. People gravitate toward strong voices, simple answers, clear commands. The brain is overwhelmed. It does not want nuance. It wants direction. Authority provides that direction, even if it is built on sand. At night, this effect intensifies. Fatigue weakens your ability to evaluate information. Your mental defenses drop. The part of you that wants to check sources and question assumptions is tired. When an authority figure offers a clean explanation, your brain gladly accepts it. Finally, something solid. Finally, rest. This is why bedtime beliefs often come from voices that sound certain. News anchors, influencers, experts, leaders. The tone matters as much as the content. Confidence lowers vigilance. Calm speech slows heart rate. The body responds before the mind can object. There is also a deep evolutionary reason for this. In uncertain environments, following a leader increased survival. Hesitation could be deadly. Trusting authority reduced cognitive load and sped up action. That wiring still exists, even when the environment no longer requires blind trust. Authority also creates emotional permission. If someone in power believes something, you feel allowed to believe it too. The responsibility shifts. If it turns out to be wrong, it was not your failure. That transfer of responsibility is comforting. It reduces internal conflict. Reduced conflict makes sleep easier. Think about how often you feel relieved when someone else decides for you, even if you disagree slightly. The relief does not come from agreement. It comes from not having to choose. Authority removes choice. Choice creates anxiety. No choice feels peaceful. This is why people can accept obvious contradictions from authority figures without protest. Questioning would require effort and risk. Accepting allows relaxation, especially when tired relaxation wins. The validating truth is that this response is human. It is not gullibility. It is regulation. Authority figures act like emotional anchors. They ground the nervous system. They promise order in chaos. The brain responds gratefully. The danger appears when authority becomes a substitute for thinking rather than a guide. When the calming effect is mistaken for truth. When the body feels safe, the mind assumes it must be right. Understanding this changes how you listen. You start noticing when something feels believable mainly because of who is saying it, not what is being said. You feel the calm first. Then, the belief follows. That order matters. This does not mean rejecting authority outright. It means separating emotional relief from factual accuracy. It means noticing when your trust is driven by fatigue, fear, or the desire to rest. Authority figures can help organize reality. They can also lull you into accepting stories that feel good enough to stop thinking. Especially late at night, when your brain is looking for a hand to hold rather than a truth to wrestle with. The unsettling realization is that sometimes you do not believe authority because it is right. You believe it because it helps you sleep. Optimism bias and the need to believe things will work out. There is a quiet promise your mind makes when the day finally slows down. It will be fine. Somehow it will work out. You may not know how, and you may not have evidence, but the thought itself brings relief. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing deepens. That single belief does more for your sleep than any plan ever could. That belief is optimism bias, and it is not naive hope. It is a psychological sedative. Optimism bias is the brain's tendency to overestimate positive outcomes and underestimate negative ones, especially when uncertainty feels overwhelming. It is why people believe tomorrow will be better even when today was rough. It is why unresolved problems feel smaller at night when paired with the idea that things usually work out. The brain is not predicting the future. It is regulating emotion. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Believing things will work out often has very little to do with probability. It has everything to do with survival. Chronic uncertainty keeps the nervous system activated. Activated systems do not sleep well. So the brain introduces optimism not as truth but as relief. Neurologically, optimism bias dampens threat response. When you imagine a positive outcome, even a vague one, the brain reduces activity in areas linked to fear and stress. Cortisol drops. The body prepares for rest. That calming effect feels like clarity, even though nothing has actually changed. You can feel this happening when you are lying awake replaying worries, bills, relationships, health. The moment you think it will probably be okay, the mental noise softens. The problem is still there, but it no longer feels urgent. That reduction in urgency is the point. Urgency keeps you awake. Optimism tells the brain there is no immediate danger. This is why optimism bias becomes stronger at night and during exhaustion. Fatigue lowers your tolerance for uncertainty. You do not have the energy to sit with worst-case scenarios, so the brain chooses the story that allows rest. It says future you will handle it. That is tomorrow's problem. Right now, sleep. Psychologists have found that optimism bias persists even when people are presented with contradictory evidence. Not because they cannot understand the evidence, but because letting go of optimism would increase anxiety. The brain protects the belief because the belief protects the body. Think about how often people downplay risks with phrases like "it will be fine" or "things always work out somehow." These are not conclusions. They are coping mechanisms. They close open loops. Open loops demand attention. Closed loops allow disengagement. Disengagement is necessary for sleep. There is also an identity component. Many people see themselves as someone who gets through things, someone resilient. Optimism bias reinforces that identity. Believing the future will be manageable supports the self-image of competence. Losing that belief would feel destabilizing. At night, identity maintenance matters. The brain is consolidating memory and meaning. It prefers narratives where you survive, adapt, and continue. Optimistic beliefs fit neatly into that story. Pessimistic realism does not. This is not to say optimism bias is always wrong. Often things do work out. Humans are adaptable, but the timing of the belief matters. At night, optimism is less about accuracy and more about sedation. It quiets rumination. It reduces emotional load. You may notice that in the morning, with more energy, you see problems more clearly. You make plans. You assess risks. At night, those same problems feel distant once wrapped in optimism. The belief did not change the facts. It changed your arousal level. There is also a social reinforcement. People are rewarded for optimism. It is seen as strength. Positivity is praised. So the brain learns that hopeful narratives are safe narratives. Safe narratives are easier to rest with. The danger appears when optimism bias replaces preparation entirely. When belief becomes avoidance. When the soothing story prevents action. But that danger is not what the tired brain is considering. The tired brain wants relief now. Understanding this changes how you relate to your hopeful thoughts at night. They are not promises. They are pacifiers. They exist to help you downshift, not to map reality. That does not make them useless. It makes them contextual. Optimism bias can carry you through moments when facing the full weight of uncertainty would be too much. It keeps you functional. It keeps you sleeping. But it is important to recognize when a belief feels true mainly because it makes you feel calm. That calm is real. The certainty is not. The brain often chooses hope not because it is earned, but because it is needed. Especially when the lights are off and the mind is tired. Believing things will work out is less about the future and more about surviving the present. And sometimes, that belief is not a forecast. It is a lullaby. Why simple explanations calm a complex world. There is a specific kind of relief that comes when something complicated suddenly feels simple. Not solved, just simplified. The noise quiets. The pressure eases. Your mind stops racing and lands somewhere solid. Even if that place is wrong, it feels stable. In a world that feels overwhelming, simple explanations act like emotional anchors. The human brain did not evolve to handle endless complexity. It evolved to survive. And survival favors clarity over accuracy when energy is limited. When the world feels chaotic, layered, and unpredictable, the nervous system goes into alert mode. Alert mode is exhausting, so the brain looks for shortcuts. Simple explanations offer one. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Simple explanations calm you not because they are correct, but because they reduce cognitive load. Complexity requires holding multiple variables at once. It demands nuance, uncertainty, and patience. That kind of thinking burns energy. Simplicity collapses everything into a single story. One cause, one reason, one takeaway. The brain loves that. Neuroscience shows that uncertainty activates threat circuits. The brain treats not knowing as potential danger. When there are too many unknowns, anxiety rises. Heart rate increases. Thoughts loop. Simple explanations shut that down. They say you understand enough. You can stop scanning now. That signal allows the nervous system to relax. You can feel this when you encounter a clean narrative about a messy issue. Even if part of you senses it is incomplete, another part exhales. Finally, something that makes sense. That relief comes before belief. The body accepts the story first. The mind follows. This is why simple explanations are so seductive late at night. Fatigue lowers your tolerance for ambiguity. You do not have the energy to wrestle with complexity. You want the mental equivalent of comfort food. Something easy to digest. Something that lets you rest. Psychologists talk about cognitive closure. The brain has a need to close open questions. Open questions keep attention engaged. Closed ones allow disengagement. Disengagement is necessary for sleep. Simple explanations close loops quickly, even if they close them incorrectly. Think about how often people prefer a wrong but clear answer over an honest "I do not know." The wrong answer gives shape. It gives edges. It allows the mind to stop wandering. The unknown feels endless. The simple feels contained. There is also an emotional aspect. Simple explanations often come with clear villains and heroes, clear causes and effects. That moral structure feels reassuring. It tells you where to stand. Complexity blurs those lines. Blurred lines create discomfort. This is why oversimplified stories spread so easily. They are not just easier to understand. They are easier to live with. They reduce internal conflict. They reduce decision fatigue. They reduce anxiety. At night, when emotional regulation is fragile, the brain prioritizes calm over correctness. It asks which story will let me sleep, not which story is most accurate. Simple explanations usually win that contest. There is also a memory advantage. Simple stories are easier to remember. They compress information into a neat package. The brain likes efficiency. When something is easy to recall, it feels reliable. That reliability gets mistaken for truth. You might notice this in the stories you tell yourself about your own life. Complex realities get reduced to simple narratives. I always mess things up. People cannot be trusted. Everything happens for a reason. These statements flatten complexity. They are not precise. They are calming. The validating part is that this is not a personal flaw. It is a universal human tendency. Even experts simplify when overwhelmed. Even intelligent people crave clarity when tired. The brain seeks rest before it seeks truth. The danger comes when simplicity becomes rigidity. When the simple explanation replaces curiosity entirely. When it stops being a temporary resting place and becomes a permanent worldview. That is when misunderstanding hardens into belief. But in the moment, especially late at night, the brain is not thinking about long-term accuracy. It is thinking about immediate relief. Simplicity offers that relief quickly and reliably. Understanding this changes how you relate to your own certainty. When something feels obvious, you can ask whether it is obvious because it is true or because it is simple. When a story feels comforting, you can notice the comfort without immediately granting it authority. Simple explanations are not always wrong. Sometimes they are useful starting points, but they are rarely complete. The calm they provide is emotional, not evidential. The complex world does not disappear because you choose a simple story. It just goes quiet for a while, quiet enough to sleep. And when you are exhausted, quiet feels like wisdom. That is why simple explanations feel so good. Not because they explain everything, but because they give your nervous system permission to stop trying. The illusion of control helps the mind rest. There is a subtle calm that arrives the moment you believe you have things under control. Even if nothing actually changed, even if the situation is still uncertain, the thought alone is enough. I have a plan. I can handle this. I know what is happening. Your body responds immediately. Muscles loosen. Breathing slows. The mind stops scanning for danger. That feeling is not clarity. It is the illusion of control doing its job. The human brain struggles deeply with helplessness, not knowing what will happen or feeling unable to influence outcomes triggers stress responses that are hard to shut off. Control, or even the perception of it, tells the nervous system that action is possible, and when action feels possible, fear quiets down. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The brain often prefers feeling in control over being accurate, especially when you are exhausted. Actual control requires effort, planning, and constant adjustment. The illusion of control is cheaper. It offers the same emotional relief without the work. And at night, when energy is low, cheap relief wins. Psychologically, the illusion of control is a well-documented bias. People consistently overestimate their influence over events, especially in uncertain situations, not because they are arrogant, but because believing you have influence reduces anxiety. The belief itself is soothing. Neurologically, this makes sense. Perceived control reduces activation in threat-related brain regions. When you believe you can predict or manage outcomes, the amygdala calms down. Stress hormones drop. The body shifts out of alert mode. That shift is necessary for rest. You can feel this when you mentally rehearse solutions before sleep. You imagine how you will handle tomorrow, what you will say, what you will do. Even if those plans never happen, the act of imagining control is enough to lower arousal. The brain treats imagined mastery as partial mastery. This is why rituals are so powerful: checking, planning, organizing, even superstitions. They create a sense of order. Order feels like control. Control feels like safety. Safety allows sleep. When life feels chaotic, the illusion of control becomes even more seductive. You might latch onto explanations that make events feel predictable. You might believe patterns are more meaningful than they are. You might convince yourself that effort guarantees outcome. These beliefs are comforting. They say the world is manageable. At night, this effect intensifies. Fatigue reduces tolerance for randomness. The brain does not want to accept that some things are out of your hands. That acceptance feels like surrender. Surrender feels unsafe. So instead, the brain creates a sense of agency, even if it is symbolic. Think about how often people fall asleep telling themselves, "Tomorrow I will fix it," or "I know what went wrong," or "I have learned my lesson." These thoughts restore a sense of control. They do not solve the problem. They sedate it. Studies show that perceived control improves stress tolerance, even when actual control is absent. The body responds to belief, not reality. If you think you are in charge, your physiology behaves as if you are. That response is adaptive. It keeps you from being overwhelmed. There is also an identity component. Many people see themselves as capable, competent, and in control. Losing that belief would threaten self-image, so the brain protects it, especially when vulnerable. Maintaining the illusion of control maintains the self. Late at night, identity maintenance matters. The brain is consolidating memory and meaning. It prefers narratives where you are an agent, not a victim. Agency feels empowering. Empowerment feels calming. The danger appears when the illusion replaces acceptance, when belief in control prevents you from acknowledging limits. But again, that danger is not what the tired brain is focused on. The tired brain wants rest now. This does not mean the illusion of control is bad. It serves a purpose. It stabilizes you when reality feels too unpredictable. It gives you space to recover. Without it, constant uncertainty would be unbearable. The key is recognizing when control is being used as a sedative rather than a tool. When the belief feels soothing but disconnected from action. when certainty appears mainly to help you sleep. You might notice that in the morning, with more energy, you can tolerate ambiguity better. You accept that not everything is manageable. At night, that acceptance feels heavy. Control feels lighter. Understanding this changes how you view your nighttime confidence. Those firm conclusions, those reassuring plans, they are not always insight. They are regulation. They help your nervous system power down. The illusion of control does not mean you are lying to yourself. It means your brain is prioritizing rest over realism. It is choosing a story where you are steering instead of drifting. And when the world feels overwhelming, drifting feels terrifying. Steering, even in imagination, feels safe. So when you notice yourself clinging to certainty late at night, believing you have everything figured out, pause. That confidence might not be wisdom. It might be your mind doing whatever it takes to finally let go. Sometimes the greatest comfort is not knowing the truth, but believing you are in control of it long enough to fall asleep. Escapism through harmless self-deception. There is a moment when reality feels too loud, too heavy, too demanding, and your mind quietly steps sideways. Not away from reality entirely, just far enough that the sharp edges stop cutting. You tell yourself a gentler version of the story. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, just something softer. And suddenly, you can breathe again. That is escapism through harmless self-deception. It does not feel like lying. It feels like mercy. Self-deception gets a bad reputation, but the brain did not invent it to sabotage you. It invented it to protect you. When the emotional load of reality exceeds your current capacity, the mind creates a parallel version that is easier to carry. Not forever, just for now. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Complete honesty with yourself at all times would be psychologically unbearable. There are moments when facing everything exactly as it is would overwhelm the nervous system, so the brain edits, it reframes, it omits, not to deny reality completely, but to make it survivable. Escapism does not always mean fantasy worlds or distractions. Sometimes it is subtle. You downplay how much something hurts. You assume things will resolve without proof. You tell yourself you are fine when you are barely holding it together. These thoughts are not conclusions, they are cushions. Neurologically, this makes sense. Emotional pain activates the same threat circuits as physical pain. When those circuits stay active too long, exhaustion follows. Self-deception dampens the signal. It lowers emotional intensity just enough to prevent overload. The body relaxes. Stress hormones decrease. Sleep becomes possible. This is why harmless self-deception often appears at night. During the day, you can stay busy. You can distract yourself with action. At night, there is nothing to hide behind. The mind slows down. The feelings catch up. And if those feelings are too much, the brain intervenes with gentler narratives. You might tell yourself it did not matter anyway. Or, it will make sense later. Or you are stronger than this. These statements may not be fully true, but they are emotionally effective. They create distance between you and the pain. Distance creates relief. Psychologists recognize this as adaptive illusion. Mild distortions of reality that help people cope with stress and maintain emotional balance. People who hold slightly optimistic or self-protective beliefs often function better under pressure. The illusion is not meant to replace reality. It is meant to buffer it. Think about how children cope with fear. They imagine protection. They believe someone is watching over them. Adults do something similar, just in more socially acceptable ways. The need is the same. Safety, containment, rest. Harmless self-deception also preserves hope. When circumstances feel bleak, hope can disappear quickly if you stare too directly at the facts. The brain resists that collapse. It keeps a small light on, even if it has to bend reality to do it. That light keeps you moving, keeps you sleeping. There is also an identity function. Many people see themselves as resilient, capable, or stable. Fully acknowledging vulnerability can feel like a threat to that identity. So the mind softens the truth, not to deceive maliciously, but to maintain coherence. A fragmented identity is harder to rest with. At night, identity matters more than accuracy. The brain is consolidating memory and meaning. It prefers stories where you are okay, where things are manageable, where the future is not a complete unknown. Those stories are easier to fall asleep with. The danger only appears when escapism becomes permanent residence instead of a temporary shelter, when self-deception blocks growth instead of buying time. But again, that is not what the exhausted brain is focused on. It wants relief now. Tomorrow can handle clarity. Understanding this reframes how you judge yourself for the thoughts you have when you are tired. Those softened versions of reality are not failures of character. They are signs of a nervous system trying to recover. You may notice that in the morning, with more energy, you see things more clearly. The illusions fade. You can tolerate discomfort again. That does not mean the nighttime beliefs were stupid. They were situational. Harmless self-deception is like emotional anesthesia. It dulls pain without stopping the underlying process. Healing still happens. Reality still exists. But you are not forced to feel everything all at once. The key is awareness. Not ripping the illusion away, but recognizing its purpose. Asking what it is protecting you from. What feeling is too intense right now? That awareness creates choice. Sometimes the kindest thing your brain can do is lie to you just enough to let you rest. Not because the truth does not matter, but because you matter too much to be crushed by it. Escapism through harmless self-deception is not about running away forever. It is about stepping out of the storm long enough to catch your breath. And when the world feels unbearable, even a gentle illusion can feel like shelter. Sometimes sleep itself depends on believing a softer story for a few hours. Not because it is true, but because it lets you survive the night. Why people trust narratives that reduce responsibility. There is a specific kind of relief that comes when you realize something is not entirely on you. Your chest loosens. The self-criticism quiets. The endless replay of what you should have done slows down. A story appears that says this was inevitable, or this was out of your hands, or anyone would have done the same. And suddenly, you can rest. That relief is why narratives that reduce responsibility are so seductive. Responsibility is heavy. It demands agency, accountability, and the possibility that things could have gone differently. That possibility hurts. It invites regret, guilt, and self-evaluation. When the brain is tired or emotionally overloaded, carrying that weight feels unbearable, so it looks for a story that sets the burden down. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Humans do not just seek truth. They seek emotional manageability. A narrative that reduces responsibility reduces emotional load. Less load means less stress. Less stress means the nervous system can finally power down. Psychologically, responsibility is closely tied to control and blame. If something is your fault, then you had power. If you had power, you could have acted differently. That realization triggers self-scrutiny. Self-scrutiny activates stress responses. At night, when your resources are low, the brain avoids anything that keeps those systems active. Narratives that reduce responsibility short-circuit that process. They say the system is broken. Circumstances were unfair. It was always going to happen this way. These explanations may not be fully accurate, but they are emotionally efficient. They remove the need to analyze every decision. They close the loop. You can feel this when you replay a mistake before bed. At first, the mind digs into what you should have done. Anxiety rises. Sleep feels impossible. Then a softer explanation appears. You were doing your best. You did not have all the information. Anyone in your position would have struggled. That story does not change the past. It changes your ability to rest with it. Neurologically, this makes sense. Self-blame activates threat circuits and keeps cortisol elevated. Self-exoneration lowers arousal. When the brain reframes responsibility away from the self, stress hormones decrease. The body interprets that as safety. This is why people are drawn to narratives that externalize cause, fate, systems, bad luck, other people. These explanations create distance between the self and the outcome. Distance reduces pain. Pain reduction feels like truth, even when it is not the whole story. There is also an identity component. Most people want to see themselves as competent and good. Full responsibility threatens that self-image when outcomes are negative, so the brain protects identity by adjusting the narrative. It is not lying maliciously. It is preserving coherence. At night, identity protection becomes especially important. The brain is consolidating memory and meaning. It prefers stories where the self remains intact. Stories where failure does not define you. Stories where you are not fundamentally flawed. Those stories are easier to fall asleep with. Social reinforcement plays a role too. Many cultures reward narratives that minimize personal responsibility when things go wrong. They sound compassionate, understanding, fair. Hearing others validate those stories makes them feel even safer. Belonging plus relief equals belief. This is not limited to personal mistakes. People trust large-scale narratives that reduce collective responsibility as well. Stories that say problems are too big for individuals to influence. That nothing you do really matters. Those stories relieve moral pressure. If you cannot change it, you do not have to wrestle with it. That relief is calming. Moral responsibility creates tension. Tension keeps you awake. Reduced responsibility releases that tension. The validating part is that this does not mean people are lazy or dishonest. It means they are human. The brain avoids sustained self-punishment. It is not built to carry endless guilt. Narratives that soften responsibility act like emotional shock absorbers. The danger appears when these narratives become permanent shields, when they prevent learning or growth. But again, the tired brain is not focused on growth. It is focused on survival and rest. You might notice that during the day, with more energy, you are more willing to take responsibility. You reflect. You plan changes. At night, that same reflection feels harsh. Responsibility feels heavier. Relief feels necessary. Understanding this helps you see why certain explanations feel instantly believable. Not because they are accurate, but because they let you stop blaming yourself long enough to sleep. When a narrative reduces responsibility, it reduces emotional friction. Friction keeps the mind spinning. Smooth stories let it settle. This does not mean responsibility is bad. It is essential for growth, but timing matters. There are moments when carrying full responsibility is too much. The brain sets it down temporarily. Recognizing this allows compassion. Instead of judging yourself for believing a softer story at night, you can see its function. It is not avoiding truth forever. It is postponing pain until you have the capacity to face it. The real question is not why people trust narratives, that reduce responsibility. The question is how much emotional weight they are already carrying when they do. Sometimes belief is not about what happened, it is about what you need to survive the night. And sometimes the only story gentle enough to let you rest is the one that says you are not entirely to blame. Hope as a psychological tranquilizer. There is a quiet shift that happens when hope enters the room. Nothing external changes. The problem is still there. The uncertainty is still real, but your body reacts as if something has been resolved. Your breathing slows. The tightness in your chest eases. Your thoughts stop spiraling and start floating. Hope does not solve anything in that moment. It sedates the fear around it. Hope is not just an emotion. It is a psychological tranquilizer. When the future feels threatening or overwhelming, the brain looks for something to lower arousal. Fear keeps the nervous system activated. Activated systems do not rest. Hope tells the brain there is a possible positive outcome ahead. That possibility alone is enough to calm the body. The brain does not need proof. It needs permission to stand down. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Hope often has very little to do with likelihood. It has everything to do with regulation. The mind uses hope to survive periods of uncertainty without collapsing under anxiety. Believing that things could improve is less about prediction and more about pain management. Neurologically, hope reduces activity in threat-related circuits. When you imagine a future where things are okay, the amygdala quiets. Stress hormones decrease. The body exits emergency mode. That chemical shift feels like clarity, even though no new information has arrived. You can feel this late at night when worries pile up. The future looks heavy. Your mind races through worst-case scenarios. Sleep feels impossible. Then a hopeful thought appears. Maybe this will pass. Maybe something good will come from it. The problem does not disappear, but the urgency does. Urgency is what keeps you awake. Hope removes urgency. This is why hope becomes stronger when you are exhausted. Fatigue lowers your tolerance for distress. You cannot sit with uncertainty for long, so the brain introduces hope as a soft landing. It says you do not need to figure this out right now. There is a future version of you that will handle it. Psychologists have found that hope buffers stress even when outcomes remain unchanged. People who feel hopeful show lower physiological stress responses. The body responds to belief, not reality. If the mind perceives a path forward, the nervous system relaxes. Hope also closes mental loops. Open loops demand attention. They keep thoughts spinning. Hope provides an ending, even if it is vague. Things will work out somehow. That somehow is not a plan. It is a placeholder. Placeholders allow disengagement. Disengagement allows sleep. There is an identity component too. Hope protects the self from despair. Despair threatens meaning. Meaninglessness is deeply destabilizing for the brain. Hope preserves the idea that life is moving somewhere, that suffering is not pointless. That belief keeps the psychological structure intact. At night, meaning matters more than accuracy. The brain is consolidating memory and narrative. It prefers stories where there is continuation, where the future is not a dead end. Hope fits perfectly into that need. This is why even unrealistic hope can feel necessary. The brain is not asking, "Is this rational?" It is asking, "Can I rest with this?" Hope often passes that test when realism does not. You may notice that in the morning with more energy, your hope becomes more grounded. You assess, you plan, you adjust expectations. At night, hope becomes softer and less specific. It does not need details. It just needs to exist. The validating part is that this does not make hope fake. It makes it functional. Hope keeps people going through situations that would otherwise break them. It reduces emotional pain. It prevents shutdown. The danger only appears when hope becomes avoidance, when it replaces action entirely. But again, that is not what the exhausted brain is prioritizing. The exhausted brain wants relief now. Action can wait. Understanding hope as a tranquilizer changes how you relate to it. When you notice yourself clinging to hopeful thoughts late at night, you do not have to judge them or overanalyze them. You can recognize their role. They are helping your nervous system recover. Hope is not always insight. Sometimes it is anesthesia. Temporary, necessary, gentle. The brain does not use hope to lie to you. It uses hope to keep you alive and functioning when reality feels too sharp. It buys you time. It buys you sleep. And sleep itself is a form of healing. Without it, no truth, no plan, no realism would matter. So when hope shows up in the dark, whispering that things might be okay, understand what is really happening. Your mind is choosing regulation over certainty, comfort over precision. Hope is not a guarantee. It is a sedative strong enough to quiet fear long enough for you to close your eyes. Sometimes that is all it needs to be. The comfort of believing suffering has a purpose. There is a moment when pain feels unbearable, not because it hurts, but because it feels meaningless. When suffering shows up without explanation, the mind panics. It searches for something to hold on to, and the moment it finds a reason, any reason, the pain shifts. It does not disappear, but it becomes tolerable. That is the comfort of believing suffering has a purpose. The human brain struggles more with meaninglessness than with pain itself. Pain can be endured if it leads somewhere, if it teaches, if it transforms, if it pays off. But pain without purpose feels like chaos. Chaos keeps the nervous system on edge. Purpose calms it. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The belief that suffering has a purpose often emerges not from evidence, but from emotional necessity. When something hurts deeply, the brain looks for a story that makes the hurt survivable. Purpose does that better than almost anything else. Psychologically, meaning acts as a regulator. When you assign purpose to pain, you reduce uncertainty. Uncertainty activates threat responses. Meaning reduces them. The body relaxes. Stress hormones decrease. The nervous system shifts out of emergency mode. That shift feels like relief. Relief gets mistaken for truth. You can feel this when something goes wrong, and you tell yourself this is happening for a reason. That phrase does not explain the event. It explains your ability to sit with it. It gives the pain a container. Containers make pain easier to hold. This belief becomes especially powerful at night. Fatigue lowers your tolerance for randomness. You do not have the energy to accept that suffering might be pointless. Pointlessness feels dangerous when you are tired. So the brain reaches for purpose. It says this will matter someday. You will understand later. That promise quiets the mind. Neuroscience supports this. The brain is a prediction machine. It wants to know what experiences are leading toward. When pain cannot be linked to a future outcome, anxiety rises. When pain is framed as meaningful, prediction error drops. The brain feels oriented again. Orientation equals safety. This is why people facing illness, loss, or hardship often report greater peace once they believe their suffering has meaning. Not because the suffering lessens, but because the nervous system stops fighting it. Resistance fades. Acceptance arrives. Acceptance is calming. There is also an identity component. Believing suffering has purpose allows you to see yourself as growing rather than breaking. It protects self-image. You are not just a victim of circumstance. You are someone being shaped. That narrative preserves dignity. Dignity is deeply regulating. At night, identity protection matters more than accuracy. The brain is consolidating memory and meaning. It prefers stories where you are resilient, evolving, becoming something stronger. Purpose-driven suffering fits neatly into that story. Culturally, this belief is reinforced everywhere. Stories, religions, self-help narratives. Hardship builds character. Pain makes you wiser. Struggle leads to strength. These ideas persist because they work emotionally. They help people endure what would otherwise feel intolerable. This does not mean they are always true. Sometimes suffering is random. Sometimes it teaches nothing. But that truth is hard to sleep with. The brain does not ask, is this philosophically correct? It asks, does this help me survive tonight? Believing suffering has purpose also reduces helplessness. If pain is part of a process, then you are not lost. You are on a path. Paths feel navigable. Being lost feels terrifying. Even a painful path feels safer than no path at all. You might notice this in how people respond to trauma. In the early stages, disbelief and shock dominate. Over time, many people search for meaning. Not because meaning erases trauma, but because it restores a sense of order. Order soothes the nervous system. Late at night, when the mind revisits painful memories, purpose acts like a sedative. It reframes the memory. It says this was not for nothing. That belief lowers emotional intensity. Lower intensity allows sleep. The validating part is that this is not weakness. It is adaptation. Humans have always used meaning to endure suffering. Without it, despair would overwhelm entire populations. Meaning is a survival tool. The danger only appears when the belief in purpose prevents honest grief or necessary change. But again, that danger is not what the exhausted brain is prioritizing. The exhausted brain wants relief now. You may notice that during the day, with more energy, you can question these beliefs. You can tolerate ambiguity. At night, ambiguity feels sharp. Purpose feels soft. Understanding this changes how you view your own thoughts. When you catch yourself assigning meaning to pain before sleep, you can recognize the function. Your mind is not solving life. It is calming itself. The belief that suffering has a purpose is not always a conclusion. Often, it is a cushion. It makes the weight bearable long enough to rest. And rest matters. Without rest, pain multiplies. With rest, pain becomes manageable. Sometimes the mind does not need answers. It needs reassurance that the pain it is carrying is not pointless. That reassurance may not be provable, but it is powerful, because believing suffering has a purpose does not remove the hurt. It removes the terror of believing the hurt means nothing at all. Why humans prefer predictable lies over chaotic truths. There is a strange sense of calm that comes when you think you know what to expect, even if what you expect is wrong. Your body settles. Your thoughts slow down. The future feels mapped out. That calm does not come from truth. It comes from predictability. And when given the choice between a predictable lie and a chaotic truth, the human brain almost always reaches for the lie. Chaos is exhausting. It forces the brain to stay alert, flexible, and ready to update at any moment. That constant readiness burns energy. Predictability, on the other hand, allows the nervous system to relax. If you believe you know how things work, you can stop scanning for surprises. That relief feels like safety. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The brain is not optimized for accuracy. It is optimized for survival. And survival favors stable expectations over correct ones. A predictable lie gives the brain a script. A chaotic truth offers none. Scripts let the mind rest. Neuroscience shows that unpredictability activates threat circuits. When outcomes feel random, the brain cannot prepare. Preparation failure signals danger. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, thoughts race. Even neutral uncertainty can trigger anxiety because the brain does not know how to respond. Chaos feels unsafe. Predictable lies shut that down. They say this is how it is. This is what happens next. Even if the story is false, it creates order. Order reduces threat response. Reduced threat feels like truth because the body relaxes. You can feel this when a simple but wrong explanation makes you feel calmer than a complex but accurate one. The accurate explanation leaves loose ends, variables, unknowns. The wrong one ties everything up neatly. Your nervous system does not care which one is correct. It cares which one lets it stand down. This preference becomes stronger when you are tired. Fatigue lowers tolerance for ambiguity. You do not have the energy to sit with complexity. You want something that makes sense immediately. Predictable lies offer instant closure. Chaotic truths demand patience. Psychologists call this the need for cognitive closure. The brain wants answers quickly, especially under stress. When closure is achieved, even falsely, anxiety drops. The brain rewards that drop. It learns that predictable stories feel good. This is why people cling to rigid worldviews, even when reality contradicts them. The worldview provides structure. It makes the world feel navigable. Challenging it would reintroduce chaos. Chaos feels dangerous, so the brain defends the lie. There is also an emotional component. Predictable lies often come with clear roles: heroes, villains, causes, effects. That clarity helps the brain categorize experience. Categorization reduces effort. Chaotic truths blur roles and outcomes. They demand constant recalibration. At night, this effect intensifies. The brain is winding down, energy is low, emotional regulation is fragile. Chaotic truths keep the mind active. Predictable lies act like lullabies. Familiar, reassuring, known. Think about how comforting routines are, even when they are inefficient. Predictable lies work the same way. They create mental routines. You know what to think, what to feel, what to expect. That predictability allows disengagement. Disengagement allows sleep. The validating part is that this preference is universal. It is not a failure of intelligence. Highly intelligent people can cling to predictable lies just as strongly. Intelligence does not remove the need for safety. It sometimes increases it. The danger comes when predictability is valued so highly that truth is avoided entirely. When lies become comforting prisons. But again, that is not what the exhausted brain is concerned with. It wants relief now. You may notice that in the morning, with more energy, you can tolerate uncertainty better. You can say, "I do not know." You can hold complexity. At night, that same complexity feels unbearable. Predictable lies feel merciful. Understanding this helps you notice when certainty feels good mainly because it removes chaos. When an explanation feels solid not because it is accurate, but because it is stable. That awareness creates space. Predictable lies do not announce themselves as lies. They feel like common sense. They feel obvious. They feel like how things have always been. That familiarity is what makes them dangerous. You stop questioning them because questioning would disrupt the calm. The brain learns quickly. It associates predictability with relief. Over time, it seeks out stories that promise order, even if they distort reality. Those stories become default beliefs, not because they are true, but because they are soothing. Chaotic truths ask you to live without a map, to accept randomness, to tolerate not knowing. That is hard work. It requires energy, patience, and emotional resilience. When you are tired, you do not have those resources, so the brain chooses the lie that lets it rest. This does not mean truth is impossible. It means timing matters. Truth is easier to face when the nervous system feels safe, when rested, when supported, when not overwhelmed. At night, safety often comes from predictability, not accuracy. The mind trades realism for rest. Once you see this, you start questioning your strongest certainties. Not to discard them, but to ask why they feel so comforting. Is it because they are true, or because they make the world feel less chaotic? Humans prefer predictable lies over chaotic truths because predictability feels like safety. And when the body feels safe, the mind can finally let go. Sometimes belief is not about understanding reality. It is about creating enough order to close your eyes without fear. Cultural myths that act as collective lullabies. Long before people had bedrooms or blankets, they had stories. Stories whispered around fires. Stories repeated so often they stopped sounding like ideas and started sounding like facts. These stories did something important. They helped people sleep. Not just physically, but psychologically. Cultural myths act as collective lullabies, soothing millions of minds at once. A cultural myth is not just a false belief. It is a shared emotional agreement. It says this is how the world works. This is what matters. This is what you can expect. When enough people believe the same story, it creates a sense of stability. Stability calms the nervous system. Calm makes rest possible. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Many cultural myths survive not because they are accurate, but because they are comforting. They reduce anxiety. They soften fear. They make uncertainty feel manageable. The brain is far more loyal to comfort than to truth, especially when exhaustion sets in. Think about myths like everything happens for a reason, or hard work always pays off, or good people are rewarded in the end. These ideas are not consistently true. Reality disproves them daily, yet they persist across generations. Why? Because they reduce existential stress. They tell people that chaos has rules, that suffering is not random, that effort is not wasted. Psychologically, shared myths lower cognitive load. If everyone around you believes the same explanation for life, you do not have to question everything. Questioning takes energy. Energy is limited. Cultural myths outsource thinking. They offer ready-made answers to complex questions. That feels like relief. Neuroscience shows that uncertainty activates threat circuits. When outcomes are unclear, the brain stays alert. Alert brains do not rest. Cultural myths close uncertainty loops. They say trust the system, trust the process, trust the story. That trust allows the nervous system to stand down. This effect intensifies at night. When the mind slows down, deeper fears surface. Questions about meaning, mortality, and belonging creep in. Cultural myths step in like familiar songs. They remind you that you are part of something larger, that others have walked this path, that there is an order, even if you cannot see it. Belonging is a powerful sedative. When you share a myth with others, you feel less alone. Loneliness keeps the brain vigilant. Connection relaxes it. Cultural myths create psychological community. Even when people are physically alone, there is also an identity function. Myths tell you who you are supposed to be, your role, your value, your purpose. Without that framework, identity becomes unstable. Identity instability is stressful. Myths stabilize identity. Stable identity feels safe. At night, safety matters more than accuracy. The brain is not trying to solve philosophy. It is trying to regulate emotion. A familiar cultural story does that quickly. You have heard it your whole life. It requires no effort to believe. Familiarity itself is calming. This is why cultural myths are often repeated during times of crisis, economic downturns, wars, social upheaval. When reality becomes overwhelming, societies lean harder into shared stories. Those stories do not fix the problem, but they help people cope with it. Children learn these myths early because the brain is especially sensitive to emotional regulation during development. Stories told in childhood often stick for life, not because they are logical, but because they are soothing. They become mental safe spaces. The validating part is that this is not manipulation by default. It is adaptation. Humans evolved in unpredictable environments. Shared myths helped groups stay cohesive and calm under pressure. Calm groups survived better than anxious ones. The danger appears when myths prevent necessary change or silence pain, when they are used to dismiss real suffering or justify harm. But again, that is not why the tired brain reaches for them. It reaches for them because they feel like home. You might notice this in yourself when you are overwhelmed. You fall back on familiar beliefs. Things will be okay. This is how it has always been. People before me survived this. These thoughts may not solve anything, but they quiet the noise. In the morning, with more energy, you may question these myths. You may see their flaws. At night, flaws feel threatening. Comfort feels necessary. Cultural myths act as collective lullabies because they synchronize belief. When many people believe the same calming story, it reinforces itself. The myth feels stronger, safer, more real. Social agreement amplifies emotional relief. Understanding this does not require you to reject all myths. It invites awareness, to notice when a belief is soothing you versus guiding you, to recognize its function without being controlled by it. Sometimes the mind does not need radical truth. It needs reassurance that the world is not entirely chaotic. Cultural myths provide that reassurance at scale. They hum quietly in the background of society, telling everyone at once that things make sense, that they belong, that tomorrow will come. And for an exhausted mind trying to rest, that shared song can be just enough to close its eyes. Emotional fatigue lowers skepticism at night. By the time night arrives, your mind is not sharp anymore. It is not alert. It is not guarded. It is tired. And when the mind is tired, it stops asking hard questions. Emotional fatigue lowers skepticism at night in a way most people never notice, but feel every single day. During the day, skepticism feels natural. You question things. You doubt explanations. You catch inconsistencies. Your brain has energy to evaluate information, weigh evidence, and hold multiple possibilities at once. That takes effort. Skepticism is not passive, it is work. At night, that work becomes exhausting. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Critical thinking is one of the first things to shut down when emotional resources are depleted. Skepticism requires cognitive control, and cognitive control is expensive. When the brain runs low on energy, it starts conserving. The easiest thing to conserve is doubt. Emotionally fatigued brains prefer acceptance over analysis. Neuroscience backs this up. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for reasoning, impulse control, and skepticism. It is also highly sensitive to fatigue. As emotional strain accumulates throughout the day, this area becomes less active. When that happens, the brain relies more on emotional and intuitive processing. That shift makes comforting ideas feel more believable. You can feel this shift late at night when a thought enters your mind and you do not challenge it. During the day, you might question it. Is that really true? Do I know that for sure? At night, the same thought slides through unexamined. It feels obvious. It feels right. not because it is correct, but because the mental guardrails are gone. Emotional fatigue also increases the need for closure. When you are tired, unfinished thoughts feel unbearable. Open questions keep the mind active. Skepticism keeps questions open. Acceptance closes them. Closure feels like relief. This is why exaggerated conclusions often appear at night. Everything is ruined. This will never change, or the opposite. Everything will work out somehow. These thoughts are not careful assessments. They are emotional endpoints. They stop the mental motion. Stopping motion is calming. Skepticism keeps motion alive. It asks what if. It invites uncertainty. Uncertainty keeps the nervous system alert. Alert systems do not sleep. There is also an emotional layer. Emotional fatigue reduces tolerance for discomfort. Skepticism often brings discomfort because it forces you to confront ambiguity or unpleasant truths. At night, the brain avoids discomfort more aggressively. It chooses beliefs that feel soothing, familiar, or reassuring. This is why late-night beliefs often soften reality. You reinterpret events in kinder ways. You accept explanations you would normally scrutinize. You trust narratives that promise safety or resolution. These beliefs feel real because they lower emotional tension. The brain learns quickly. It associates certain thoughts with relief. Over time, it becomes easier to accept those thoughts at night. Skepticism fades not because you stop caring about truth, but because your nervous system is prioritizing rest. Social content consumption shows this clearly. People scrolling at night are more likely to accept misleading headlines or emotional claims. Not because they are less intelligent, but because their skepticism is offline. Emotional fatigue makes the brain more suggestible. This is not a personal flaw. It is a biological trade-off. The brain cannot stay vigilant forever. It must choose between constant evaluation and recovery. At night, recovery wins. The validating part is that this happens to everyone. Even people who pride themselves on rational thinking experience this drop. Intelligence does not override exhaustion. In fact, highly analytical people often feel this shift more intensely because they burn more cognitive energy during the day. You may notice that in the morning, some nighttime beliefs feel strange. You question them again. The skepticism returns. That does not mean the night version of you was naive. It was depleted. Understanding this changes how you relate to your nighttime thoughts. Instead of assuming they are deep truths, you can see them as emotional placeholders. They exist to reduce strain, not to represent reality perfectly. This does not mean you should ignore everything you think at night. It means you should be gentle with it. Recognize the context. Emotional fatigue changes how beliefs feel. Comfort often masquerades as certainty. The brain is not designed to process complex truths when exhausted. It is designed to shut down systems that keep it awake. Skepticism is one of those systems. So when you find yourself believing things more easily at night, trusting explanations without questioning, or accepting narratives that feel soothing, understand what is happening. Your mind is lowering defenses so you can rest. Truth can wait. Evaluation can wait. Doubt can wait. Sleep cannot. Emotional fatigue lowers skepticism at night because skepticism is expensive and rest is essential. Sometimes the mind has to stop asking if something is true and start asking if it is calm enough to fall asleep with. And in the dark, calm almost always wins. Why the mind softens reality to prevent burnout. Burnout does not arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, disguised as competence. You keep going. You keep functioning. You keep telling yourself you are fine. And somewhere along the way, your mind starts editing reality without asking permission. not to deceive you, but to keep you alive. That is why the mind softens reality to prevent burnout. Most people think burnout comes from doing too much. That is only half true. Burnout comes from feeling too much for too long without relief. Constant pressure, constant responsibility, constant emotional exposure. The nervous system cannot stay in that state indefinitely. Something has to give. Here is the uncomfortable truth. When external demands do not slow down, the brain adjusts internal perception instead. If it cannot reduce the load, it reduces how intensely you feel it. Reality gets blurred around the edges. Sharp details fade. Emotional reactions flatten. This is not weakness. It is a survival response. Psychologically, this is called emotional dampening. When stress remains high for extended periods, the brain lowers emotional sensitivity to avoid overload. Think of it like turning down the volume, because the noise will not stop. The sound is still there. It just hurts less. You can feel this when things that once bothered you start feeling distant. You tell yourself it is not that bad, or it does not matter anymore, or you will deal with it later. These thoughts are not conclusions. They are pressure valves. Neurologically, chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated. Elevated cortisol damages attention, memory, and emotional regulation. To counter this, the brain reduces how deeply it processes stressful information. Less processing equals less damage. Softened reality equals preservation. This softening often shows up at night. During the day, adrenaline and routine carry you forward. At night, when stimulation drops, the accumulated weight surfaces. The brain recognizes the danger of overwhelm and intervenes. It reframes, it minimizes, it numbs, anything to prevent collapse. You might notice yourself thinking that a problem is not as serious as it actually is, or that things will somehow resolve, or that you are not that affected. These thoughts feel calming. That calm is the goal. Accuracy is secondary. Burnout is not just physical exhaustion. It is emotional depletion. When emotions are depleted, the brain cannot afford raw honesty. Raw honesty would flood the system. So it softens reality into something manageable. There is also an identity component. Many people tie their worth to productivity, responsibility, or resilience. Fully acknowledging burnout threatens that identity, so the mind protects it by reframing experience. You are not burned out. You are just tired. You do not hate this. You are just stressed. These distinctions create emotional distance. At night, identity protection becomes critical. The brain is consolidating memory and meaning. It prefers stories where you are still capable, still in control, still okay. Those stories are easier to rest with. This is why people often realize they are burned out only after they have rested. Once the nervous system recovers, perception sharpens, reality returns in full color. Before that, softness is necessary. The validating part is that this mechanism works. People who soften reality under prolonged stress often last longer than those who face everything head-on without relief. The brain is choosing sustainability over clarity. The danger appears when softening becomes permanent, when emotional numbness replaces engagement. But again, that is not the mind's intention. The intention is temporary protection. Buy time, prevent breakdown. You may notice that on days off or after sleep, reality feels heavier again. Problems feel real. Emotions return. That does not mean rest made things worse. It means the mind no longer needs to shield you as aggressively. Softening reality is like emotional insulation. It does not remove the cold. It keeps you from freezing. Without it, burnout would happen faster and harder. Understanding this changes how you judge yourself. If you notice yourself minimizing stress or downplaying pain, it does not mean you are in denial. It means your nervous system is regulating exposure. The mind is not designed to process endless strain at full intensity. It is designed to adapt. Sometimes adaptation looks like optimism. Sometimes it looks like detachment. Sometimes it looks like telling yourself a gentler story than the facts support. At night, especially, the brain prioritizes recovery. It smooths the rough edges of reality so you can disengage. Disengagement allows sleep. Sleep allows repair. This does not mean truth does not matter. It means timing matters. There is a difference between facing reality and being flooded by it. The brain chooses the version that keeps you functional. Once you have capacity again, reality can sharpen. You can make changes. You can address burnout. But before that, survival comes first. The mind softens reality to prevent burnout because unfiltered reality, under constant pressure, would break you. Sometimes the most caring thing your brain can do is make life feel a little less intense than it really is. Not to lie to you, but to keep you standing long enough to rest. The need to believe tomorrow will be better. There is a quiet promise the mind makes to itself when the day is too heavy to hold anymore. It is not spoken out loud, but it hums beneath the exhaustion. Tomorrow will be better, even when there is no evidence, even when nothing is scheduled to change. That belief slips in anyway, because without it, the weight of today would be unbearable. The need to believe tomorrow will be better is not optimism. It is regulation. When the present feels overwhelming, the brain looks forward, not to plan, but to survive. If today is all there is, suffering feels endless. Endless suffering triggers panic. Panic keeps the nervous system activated. Activated systems do not rest. The belief in a better tomorrow creates an endpoint. Endpoints calm the brain. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The mind does not need tomorrow to actually be better. It needs to believe that it could be. Possibility alone is enough to lower emotional intensity. That possibility acts like a psychological handhold when everything else feels slippery. Neurologically, the brain is constantly predicting the future. When predictions are negative and feel permanent, stress skyrockets. Cortisol rises, sleep collapses. But when the brain imagines a positive shift, even a vague one, threat circuits quiet down. The body reacts as if relief is coming. That reaction feels like hope, but it is really self-preservation. You can feel this late at night when your thoughts spiral. Everything feels wrong. The future looks like an extension of today. Anxiety peaks. Then a thought appears. Maybe tomorrow will feel different. Maybe you will have more energy. Maybe this will pass. That thought does not solve anything. It stops the spiral. Stopping the spiral is the point. The brain cannot rest while believing pain is endless. It needs a horizon. Tomorrow becomes that horizon. This belief becomes strongest when you are exhausted because exhaustion lowers your tolerance for permanence. You cannot sit with the idea that things might stay this hard, so the brain refuses it. It introduces improvement as a buffer, not because improvement is guaranteed, but because despair is dangerous. Psychologists have observed that people who maintain future-oriented hope cope better under stress, even when circumstances do not change. The body responds to belief, not outcome. If the mind expects relief, the nervous system relaxes. Relaxation allows sleep. Sleep restores capacity. There is also an identity layer. Believing tomorrow will be better protects the self from collapse. It says you are not stuck, you are in motion. Motion implies agency. Agency feels safer than helplessness. Even imagined agency calms the brain. At night, identity stability matters more than realism. The brain is consolidating meaning. It prefers stories where the self continues, where there is growth or at least change. Tomorrow represents continuation. Without it, the mind feels cornered. This is why depression feels so heavy. It removes the belief in a better tomorrow. It traps the mind in an eternal present. That trapped feeling keeps stress systems online. Sleep becomes difficult. Energy drains further. The cycle deepens. The belief in a better tomorrow interrupts that cycle, even temporarily, even falsely. It gives the nervous system permission to power down. You might notice that this belief is often vague. Tomorrow will be better how? The brain does not specify. Specifics would invite evaluation. Evaluation could fail. Vagueness is safer. Vague hope cannot be disproven easily. That makes it emotionally efficient. Culturally, this belief is reinforced constantly. New day, fresh start. Things look better in the morning. These ideas persist because they work emotionally. They help people close their eyes when the present is too loud. The validating part is that this need does not make you naive. It makes you human. The brain evolved to keep you moving forward. Forward motion requires belief in improvement. Without it, motivation collapses. The danger appears only when the belief replaces action indefinitely, when tomorrow is always better, but nothing changes. But again, that is not the concern of the exhausted mind. The exhausted mind is not planning a life overhaul. It is trying to survive the night. You may notice that in the morning, your belief recalibrates. You assess reality again. You adjust expectations. That does not mean the nighttime belief was foolish. It was situational. Understanding this changes how you treat your own thoughts. When you find yourself clinging to the idea that tomorrow will be better, you do not have to argue with it. You can recognize its role. It is a sedative for despair. The brain does not believe tomorrow will be better because it has proof. It believes it because believing otherwise would keep you awake, panicked, and depleted. Sometimes the most important function of belief is not accuracy, it is endurance. The need to believe tomorrow will be better is the mind choosing survival over certainty. And sometimes that belief is the only thing gentle enough to carry you into sleep. Fear avoidance through selective belief. Fear does not always announce itself as panic. Sometimes it shows up as preference. You gravitate towards certain explanations. You avoid others. You accept some ideas instantly and reject others without much thought. It feels like choice, but often it is protection. Fear avoidance through selective belief is one of the quietest ways the mind keeps itself safe. When something threatens your sense of stability, the brain does not always confront it head-on. Confrontation takes energy and courage. Fear drains both. So instead, the mind filters. It lets in beliefs that feel manageable and blocks out ones that feel overwhelming. This filtering happens automatically. You rarely notice it happening. Here is the uncomfortable truth. People do not believe what they want to be true as much as they believe what they can emotionally tolerate. If a belief triggers too much fear, anxiety, or uncertainty, the mind pushes it away, regardless of its accuracy. Safety comes first. Fear activates threat circuits in the brain. Those circuits are designed to keep you alive, not informed. When fear stays active for too long, it exhausts the nervous system. Exhausted systems look for shortcuts. Selective belief is one of those shortcuts. You can feel this when certain possibilities are dismissed immediately, not because you examined them and found them wrong, but because thinking about them makes your chest tighten. Your mind moves on quickly. It finds an explanation that feels less scary. That explanation feels right because it calms you. This is especially noticeable at night. Emotional defenses are lower. Fatigue reduces your ability to sit with discomfort. Fear feels sharper in the dark. The brain responds by narrowing the range of acceptable beliefs. Only ideas that reduce fear are allowed through. Everything else feels intrusive. Neurologically, this makes sense. The prefrontal cortex, which evaluates evidence and manages fear, loses efficiency when tired. Emotional centers take over. Those centers are biased toward avoidance. They favor beliefs that reduce perceived threat, even if those beliefs distort reality. Selective belief also protects identity. Some truths threaten how you see yourself or the world. They imply loss of control, vulnerability, or uncertainty. Fear grows when identity feels unstable, so the mind chooses beliefs that preserve a coherent self-image. You are safe. You are capable. Things make sense. These beliefs reduce fear, which makes them feel trustworthy. There is also a memory component. Fearful information is emotionally loud. It sticks. Too much of it overwhelms the system. Selective belief acts like a filter to prevent overload. The mind says not this one, not right now. That boundary prevents emotional flooding. You might notice this when you avoid certain news topics, conversations, or thoughts before bed. You are not being ignorant. You are regulating fear. Sleep requires a sense of safety. Unsafe ideas keep the nervous system alert. Alert systems do not rest. Selective belief also explains why reassuring narratives spread so easily. They promise safety. They minimize threat. They simplify danger. The brain recognizes their calming effect immediately. Calm feels like truth when you are afraid. The validating part is that this mechanism works. People who allow their minds to soften fear through selective belief often function better in the short term. They sleep. They recover. They get through difficult periods without collapsing. The danger only appears when selective belief becomes rigid, when fear avoidance prevents necessary awareness or action. But again, that is not the concern of the exhausted brain. The exhausted brain is not planning long-term strategy. It is trying to survive the moment. You may notice that when you feel rested and supported, your beliefs become more flexible. You can consider uncomfortable possibilities. You can tolerate fear without immediately shutting it down. That does not mean you changed intellectually. It means your nervous system feels safer. Understanding this changes how you judge belief. When you catch yourself rejecting certain ideas instantly, you can ask what fear they trigger, not to force yourself to accept them, but to recognize the emotional filter at work. Selective belief is not cowardice. It is regulation. The mind chooses beliefs the way the body chooses posture when injured. It avoids what hurts too much. At night, fear avoidance becomes stronger because resources are low. The brain prioritizes rest. It allows only those thoughts that keep arousal down. Everything else is postponed. This does not mean truth is irrelevant. It means timing matters. There is a difference between avoiding fear forever and setting it aside until you have the capacity to face it. Fear avoidance through selective belief is the mind saying not now. I need calm before I need clarity. Once calm returns, clarity can follow. But without calm, clarity feels like threat. So the brain chooses beliefs that soften fear, narrow uncertainty, and create emotional shelter. Sometimes belief is not about understanding the world. It is about making the world feel safe enough to close your eyes. And when fear is loud, selective belief is how the mind turns the volume down just enough to rest. How nostalgia distorts truth into comfort. Nostalgia rarely announces itself as distortion. It arrives as warmth, as softness, as a gentle ache that feels safe to sit with. You remember a time and suddenly the present loosens its grip. Your shoulders drop, your breathing slows. That is when truth quietly bends. Nostalgia does not ask permission to edit reality. It does it because comfort matters more than accuracy. Nostalgia is not memory. It is regulation. When the present feels uncertain or exhausting, the mind looks backward for stability. The past feels known, finished, contained. Even when it was painful, it is no longer threatening. That sense of containment is soothing. The brain prefers a familiar ache over an unpredictable one. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Nostalgia selectively highlights what felt safe and minimizes what felt difficult. It is not an honest replay. It is a curated experience designed to calm the nervous system. The brain keeps the emotional highs and softens the lows because full accuracy would defeat the purpose. Neurologically, memory is reconstructive, not archival. Every time you remember something, you rebuild it using your current emotional state. When you are tired or overwhelmed, the brain rebuilds the past in warmer tones. Warmth reduces stress. Stress reduction feels like truth. You can feel this late at night when your mind drifts to simpler times. Childhood summers, old friendships. A version of life that felt lighter. You rarely remember the boredom, the confusion, the loneliness that also existed then. Those details are inconvenient. They do not serve regulation, so they fade. Nostalgia works because it creates emotional contrast. Compared to the present, the past feels calmer, slower, safer. That contrast lowers current distress. The brain says you have survived before. You have felt okay before. That reminder reduces perceived threat. Psychologists have found that nostalgic reflection increases feelings of social connection and meaning. Even when you are alone, nostalgia makes you feel accompanied by your past self or past relationships. Loneliness decreases. Decreased loneliness lowers anxiety. Lower anxiety makes rest possible. This is why nostalgia intensifies during stress, transition, or fatigue. When the future feels unstable, the brain anchors itself to what feels solid. The past cannot surprise you. That predictability is comforting. There is also an identity function. Nostalgia reinforces continuity. It says you are still the same person who lived through those moments. Continuity stabilizes identity. Identity instability is stressful. Stable identity feels safe. At night, identity stability matters more than realism. The brain is winding down. It does not want to question who you are or where you are going. Nostalgia offers reassurance. You have been okay. You have belonged. You have been loved. Those beliefs are easier to fall asleep with. The distortion happens quietly. You remember a relationship as purer than it was. A time as happier than it felt day to day. A version of yourself as simpler. These memories feel true because they produce calm. Calm gets mistaken for accuracy. The validating part is that this distortion is not random. It is targeted. The brain keeps what regulates and discards what agitates. Nostalgia is emotional triage. This does not mean nostalgia is fake. It means it is selective. It preserves emotional essence rather than factual detail. The essence is what matters for regulation. You may notice that when you are rested and emotionally stable, your memories become more balanced. You remember the frustrations too, the limitations, the reasons you moved on. At night, when resources are low, balance feels harsh. Comfort feels necessary. Nostalgia also protects against existential anxiety. Remembering meaningful moments reassures the brain that life has contained value before. If it happened once, it can happen again. That belief softens fear about the future. Culturally, nostalgia is reinforced constantly. Music, photos, stories, remakes. These are not just entertainment. They are emotional anchors. They remind people of who they were and where they came from. That reminder calms collective anxiety. The danger appears when nostalgia becomes avoidance, when the past is idealized so strongly that the present feels intolerable. But again, that is not why the tired brain reaches for it. It reaches for nostalgia because it soothes. Understanding this changes how you relate to your memories. When a nostalgic thought brings comfort, you do not have to correct it immediately. You can recognize its role. It is helping you regulate. Truth can be revisited when you have energy. At night, energy is low. The brain prioritizes gentleness. Nostalgia distorts truth into comfort because comfort keeps the nervous system from burning out. It gives the mind a place to rest that feels familiar and safe. Sometimes the past feels better not because it was, but because remembering it that way helps you survive the present. Nostalgia is not a lie you tell yourself. It is a soft focus lens the mind uses when reality feels too sharp. And when the world feels heavy, that softness can be the difference between lying awake and finally letting go. Believing you're doing fine to end the day peacefully. There is a quiet sentence many people whisper to themselves at the end of the day. It is not triumphant. It is not proud. It is gentle and tired. I am doing fine. That sentence does not mean everything is okay. It means you need the day to stop hurting you. Believing you are doing fine is how the mind closes the door without slamming it. By nightfall, your emotional bandwidth is gone. You have made decisions, absorbed stress, managed reactions, carried expectations. Even if nothing dramatic happened, the accumulation is real. The nervous system is not interested in analysis anymore. It is interested in landing the plane safely. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The belief that you are doing fine is often not an assessment. It is a sedative. It lowers emotional arousal just enough for the system to power down. Without it, the mind would keep scanning for what went wrong, what still needs fixing, what you failed to do. Self-evaluation is exhausting. Throughout the day, you are constantly measuring yourself against internal and external standards. Am I enough? Am I behind? Did I mess that up? At night, those questions become dangerous. They keep the brain active. Active brains do not sleep, so the mind intervenes. It softens the scoreboard. It blurs the details. It says you showed up, you survived, you did what you could, you are doing fine. That phrase shuts down the internal audit. It creates emotional closure. Neurologically, this matters. Self-criticism activates threat circuits. Threat circuits increase cortisol and adrenaline. Those chemicals are useful for action, not rest. Self-reassurance does the opposite. It signals safety. Safety allows the parasympathetic nervous system to take over. Heart rate slows. Muscles relax. Sleep becomes possible. You can feel this shift when you stop replaying the day and instead accept a general sense of okayness. The problems do not vanish, but they lose sharpness. That loss of sharpness is the goal. Believing you are doing fine also protects identity. Many people tie their worth to productivity, progress, or emotional control. Fully acknowledging struggle threatens that identity. It suggests weakness or failure. At night, identity threats feel heavier. The brain shields you by affirming adequacy. This is why the belief is often vague. Not great, not perfect, just fine. Fine is neutral. Neutral is safe. Safe is restful. Psychologically, this is a form of self-soothing. Children are soothed by caregivers. Adults learn to soothe themselves. Saying you are doing fine is an internal caregiving act. It provides reassurance when external reassurance is unavailable. This belief becomes especially important during prolonged stress. When days blur together and progress feels invisible, constantly acknowledging struggle would lead to burnout. The mind needs moments of acceptance to reset. At night, acceptance beats accuracy. You may notice that in the morning you reassess. You notice what needs work. You feel motivated again. That does not mean the nighttime belief was dishonest. It was situational. It served a different purpose. The validating part is that this belief does not stop growth. It makes growth sustainable. Without rest, reflection becomes punishment. With rest, reflection becomes possible. There is also a social layer. Many people spend the day performing competence, holding it together, being reliable. At night, believing you are doing fine lets you release the performance without collapsing into self-doubt. It creates a soft landing. This belief also prevents emotional spillover. If you go to sleep convinced you are failing, that emotional state carries into dreams and into the next day. Believing you are doing fine creates emotional containment. It keeps distress from leaking everywhere. The danger only appears when this belief becomes permanent denial, when fine replaces honesty entirely. But again, that is not the role it is playing at the end of the day. Its role is to help you stop. Understanding this changes how you treat that thought. When you catch yourself saying, "I am doing fine," you cannot need to interrogate it. You can recognize it as a boundary, a way of telling your mind that tonight is not for fixing everything. There will be time for clarity. There will be time for change. There will be time for hard conversations with yourself. Night is not that time. Believing you are doing fine is how the mind gives itself permission to rest without unraveling. It is not a declaration of success. It is an act of mercy. The brain knows that endless self-scrutiny leads to exhaustion. Exhaustion leads to breakdown, so it chooses a gentler story, one that allows you to close the day without carrying every unresolved feeling into sleep. Sometimes peace does not come from solving your life. It comes from temporarily agreeing to stop judging it. Believing you are doing fine is not about lying to yourself. It is about ending the day peacefully enough to begin the next one at all. The brain's reward system reinforces calming falsehoods. There is a reason certain thoughts feel good the moment they appear. Not relieved good. Rewarded good, a small internal yes that settles your body and quiets your mind. That feeling is not accidental, it is chemistry. The brain's reward system reinforces calming falsehoods because calm is treated as success. The brain does not reward truth, it rewards relief. Every day your nervous system is tracking one main question: am I safe enough to stand down? When a thought reduces tension, lowers anxiety, or brings emotional comfort, the brain marks it as useful. Useful thoughts get reinforced. They return more easily next time. Accuracy is not part of the criteria. Here is the uncomfortable truth. If a belief calms you, your brain will encourage it, even if it is wrong. Especially if you are tired. Dopamine is often misunderstood as a pleasure chemical, but its real role is reinforcement. It marks behaviors and thoughts that help you regulate. When a thought reduces stress, dopamine signals that it worked. The brain learns this pattern quickly. Calm equals reward. You can feel this late at night when a reassuring explanation pops into your head. Maybe it is not that bad. Maybe it will all work out. Maybe you are overthinking. The moment you believe it, your body relaxes. That relaxation triggers a reward response. The belief feels true because it feels good. This creates a feedback loop. The more a falsehood calms you, the more your brain reuses it. Over time, the belief becomes automatic. It does not feel like something you choose. It feels like common sense. The reward system does not evaluate long-term consequences. It evaluates immediate effect. Did this thought lower arousal right now? If yes, reinforce it. This is especially powerful when emotional fatigue is high. Tired brains are desperate for relief. Relief gets rewarded more strongly. Neurologically, stress and reward are tightly linked. Chronic stress depletes dopamine availability. When relief finally arrives, the contrast is sharp. The reward signal spikes. The brain remembers that relief source vividly. This is why calming falsehoods often appear simple and absolute. Everything will be fine. You are fine. Nothing bad will happen. These statements remove complexity instantly. Instant relief produces a stronger reward than nuanced truth ever could. At night, this mechanism intensifies. The prefrontal cortex is less active. Emotional and reward systems take the lead. Thoughts are judged by how they feel, not how accurate they are. Calm thoughts win. This is also why confronting uncomfortable truths late at night feels almost physically painful. They spike stress without offering immediate relief. The reward system withholds dopamine. The brain learns to avoid those thoughts at that time. Over time, the brain associates certain narratives with rest. Those narratives become bedtime beliefs. They help you disengage from the world. Disengagement allows sleep. Sleep restores energy. The brain credits the belief for the recovery. The validating part is that this is not stupidity. It is efficiency. The brain is designed to conserve energy. Evaluating truth is costly. Accepting calming explanations is cheap. When resources are low, cheap solutions win. This mechanism explains why repeated reassurance becomes more believable. Each time a falsehood calms you, it gets another reward stamp. Familiar calming lies feel safer than unfamiliar truths because they are heavily reinforced. Social reinforcement adds another layer. When others repeat the same calming narratives, the reward signal strengthens. Social agreement triggers additional dopamine. Belief feels even more solid. This does not mean the brain prefers lies in general. It prefers regulation. When truth regulates, it is rewarded. When truth destabilizes, it is avoided. The system is neutral, survival-focused. The danger appears when the reward system becomes trained almost exclusively on false comfort, when discomfort is avoided at all costs. But again, that is not what the exhausted brain is optimizing for. It is optimizing for rest. You may notice that after sleep, certain beliefs feel weaker. The reward signal fades. You can question them again. That does not mean they were irrational at night. They were chemically reinforced in a different state. Understanding this changes how you relate to belief. When a thought feels undeniably true because it calms you, you can pause and ask what it is doing for your nervous system. Not to reject it, but to contextualize it. Calming falsehoods are not failures of logic. They are products of a reward system doing its job, lowering stress, preserving energy, preventing overload. The brain does not ask, is this belief correct? It asks, does this belief help me rest? If the answer is yes, dopamine says, remember this. That is how falsehoods become familiar. That is how comfort becomes convincing. And that is why some beliefs feel strongest when you are weakest. The brain's reward system reinforces calming falsehoods because calm is survival currency. Sometimes the mind chooses the belief that lets it breathe, not because it is true, but because it works. Why harsh truths trigger insomnia? There is a specific kind of truth that does not argue with you during the day. but ambushes you at night. You lie down. The room is quiet, and suddenly a realization lands in your chest instead of your head. Something about your life, your choices, your limits, and your body reacts before your mind can explain why. Your heart rate jumps, your stomach tightens. Sleep disappears. That is why harsh truths trigger insomnia. Harsh truths are not just facts. They are emotionally activating information. They threaten how you see yourself, how you imagine your future, or how safe you feel in the world. During the day you have buffers, distraction, momentum, noise. At night, those buffers vanish. The truth hits raw. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Sleep requires a felt sense of safety. Not intellectual safety, nervous system safety. Harsh truths signal threat, even when no physical danger exists. The brain does not care. It responds as if something important is wrong and needs immediate attention. Neurologically, this is predictable. Harsh truths activate the same brain circuits involved in danger detection. The amygdala lights up. Cortisol rises. The body prepares for action. Action mode and sleep mode cannot coexist. You can feel this when a realization keeps repeating in your mind. I am stuck. I wasted time. This relationship is not what I thought. I am avoiding something important. These thoughts are not loud. They are heavy, and heaviness keeps the nervous system alert. The brain treats unresolved threats as unfinished business. Unfinished business demands wakefulness. Sleep would mean ignoring the threat. The brain refuses. This is why harsh truths often arrive without solutions. They raise questions instead of answering them. What now? What does this mean? What if nothing changes? Open questions keep the mind engaged. Engagement blocks sleep. At night, your tolerance for emotional discomfort is lower. You have spent the day regulating yourself. By bedtime, those regulatory resources are depleted. The same truth that felt manageable at noon now feels overwhelming. The nervous system cannot absorb it calmly. There is also an identity component. Many harsh truths threaten identity. They suggest you are not who you thought you were, or your life is not heading where you believed. Identity threats are deeply destabilizing. The brain reacts strongly because identity is tied to survival. Losing a sense of self feels like danger. At night, identity feels more fragile. The brain is winding down and consolidating memory. Introducing a harsh truth at that moment disrupts coherence. Disruption creates anxiety. Anxiety keeps you awake. This is why insomnia is often worse during periods of transition, grief, or realization. Nothing external is happening in the bedroom. Everything is happening internally. The brain is trying to process information it does not yet know how to integrate. Harsh truths also remove comforting narratives. They strip away illusions that once regulated you. Illusions about control, certainty, or meaning. Without those buffers, reality feels sharp. Sharpness activates vigilance. Sleep requires a sense that nothing needs immediate fixing. Harsh truths say the opposite. They say something is wrong and unresolved. The brain stays on duty. The validating part is that this does not mean you are weak or dramatic. It means your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Stay awake when something important feels unsettled. You might notice that once a harsh truth is processed during the day, sleep improves. Not because the truth changed, but because your nervous system learned how to hold it. Integration reduces threat. Threat reduction allows rest. This is also why forcing yourself to think through harsh truths at night backfires. Analysis increases activation. Problem-solving signals urgency. Urgency tells the brain to stay awake. The mind often tries to protect itself from this by avoiding harsh truths at night. It softens reality. It distracts. It reframes. That is not denial. That is regulation. Understanding this helps you stop fighting insomnia with logic. You cannot argue your nervous system into sleep while it feels threatened. The goal is not to solve the truth at night. The goal is to make the body feel safe enough to rest. This might mean postponing the truth, telling yourself not now, tomorrow, with energy, with daylight. That postponement lowers urgency. Lower urgency allows sleep. Harsh truths do not trigger insomnia because they are true. They trigger insomnia because they are unresolved and emotionally activating. Sleep comes when the brain believes it is safe to let go. If a truth makes letting go feel dangerous, the brain will not cooperate. So when you find yourself awake because a realization will not leave you alone, understand what is happening. Your nervous system is asking for containment, not answers. There will be time to face the truth fully. Night is not that time. Night is for safety, softness, and rest. Harsh truths demand daylight, energy, and support. Insomnia is not your mind failing to sleep. It is your mind refusing to sleep while something important still feels unsafe to ignore. The survival value of temporary self-deception. There are moments when being completely honest with yourself would not make you stronger. It would make you collapse. In those moments, the mind does something quiet and protective. It bends the truth just enough to keep you moving. That is not weakness. That is survival. Temporary self-deception has value because sometimes the truth, delivered all at once, would overwhelm the system meant to carry it. Self-deception sounds dangerous until you understand why it exists. The brain did not evolve to pursue truth at all costs. It evolved to keep you alive, functional, and stable enough to face tomorrow. When reality becomes emotionally unmanageable, accuracy becomes secondary to endurance. Here is the uncomfortable truth. There are times when seeing everything clearly would do more harm than good. Loss, trauma, failure, uncertainty. When these hit at full force, the nervous system can overload. Overload leads to shutdown, panic, or despair. Temporary self-deception steps in as a buffer. Psychologically, this is called adaptive denial or positive illusion. It is the brain choosing a version of reality that reduces emotional intensity. Not forever, just long enough to recover. This allows the nervous system to regulate instead of collapse. You can feel this when something painful happens and your first thought is it is not that bad, or I will deal with it later. Those thoughts are not conclusions. They are stabilizers. They keep you from being flooded by emotion when you do not yet have the capacity to process it. Neurologically, intense emotional truth activates threat circuits. Threat circuits increase stress hormones and keep the body in high alert. That state is useful in short bursts, not long stretches. If it lasts too long, it damages sleep, immune function, and mental health. Temporary self-deception lowers that activation. This is why people often feel strangely calm immediately after shocking news. The brain numbs perception. It creates distance. That numbness is a form of self-deception. It says this is not fully real yet. That distance prevents breakdown. At night, this mechanism becomes even more important. Emotional resources are depleted. The mind cannot process heavy truths safely, so it softens them. It reframes. It delays. These are not lies meant to last. They are emotional tourniquets. Temporary self-deception also preserves agency. When something feels overwhelming, believing you can handle it or that it will resolve somehow keeps you functional. Without that belief, paralysis sets in. Action requires some level of optimism. Even if it is not fully justified, there is also an identity function. Many truths threaten how you see yourself. A sudden confrontation with inadequacy or failure can destabilize identity. Temporary self-deception protects coherence. It keeps the self intact until it can be rebuilt more honestly. The validating part is that this strategy works. People who allow themselves short periods of softened reality often recover better than those who force brutal honesty too early. Timing matters. Truth is not helpful if it arrives before capacity. This does not mean self-deception should become permanent. Long-term denial prevents growth. But temporary self-deception is not about avoiding reality forever. It is about pacing exposure, like gradually adjusting your eyes to bright light instead of staring directly into it. You may notice that once you rest, gain support, or feel safer, the truth starts to come into focus on its own. The brain lifts the filter when it senses readiness. That is integration. That is healing. This mechanism explains why people sometimes look back and say, "I do not know how I got through that." They got through it by not seeing all of it at once. The mind protected them. Children use this instinctively. They imagine safety when scared. Adults do the same, just in quieter ways, telling yourself it will be okay, downplaying risk, believing things will make sense later. These beliefs buy time. At night, especially, survival matters more than clarity. Sleep is a biological priority. Without sleep, nothing improves. Temporary self-deception helps shut down systems that would otherwise keep you awake. Understanding this changes how you judge your own thoughts. When you notice yourself believing something softer than reality, you do not need to immediately correct it. You can ask what it is protecting you from. What emotion would hit if the filter dropped? Often, the answer is overwhelm. Temporary self-deception is the mind saying, "Not yet. I need to rest before I can face this." That is wisdom, not cowardice. There will be moments when honesty is necessary and powerful. Those moments require energy, safety, and support. Exhaustion is not the right environment for truth to land cleanly. The survival value of temporary self-deception is simple. It keeps you functional when reality threatens to break you. It keeps you sleeping when fear wants to keep you alert. It keeps you moving forward when stopping would be dangerous. Truth matters, but so does timing. Sometimes the most intelligent thing the brain can do is lie to you just long enough to heal, not to escape reality, but to survive it. Why humans equate calm with safety? Calm feels like an answer even when no question was solved. Your body relaxes, your thoughts slow, and suddenly everything seems less urgent. In that moment, your brain decides something important. I am safe. That decision happens faster than logic, faster than memory, faster than truth. Humans equate calm with safety because for most of our history, calm meant survival. Safety is not an idea. It is a bodily state. Long before humans could analyze risk or debate facts, survival depended on reading internal signals. When danger was present, the body activated, heart rate up, muscles tense, attention sharp. When danger passed, the body relaxed. Calm meant the threat was gone. That association became deeply wired. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The brain still uses calm as its primary safety indicator, even when the source of calm has nothing to do with actual safety. If your nervous system settles, your brain assumes the environment is secure. It does not ask why you are calm. It just accepts the signal. Neurologically, this makes sense. The nervous system operates on efficiency. It cannot analyze every situation from scratch. It relies on shortcuts. One of the strongest shortcuts is arousal level. High arousal equals danger. Low arousal equals safety. This is why calming explanations feel believable. They lower arousal. Lower arousal signals safety. Safety signals truth. You can feel this late at night when a thought soothes you. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing deepens. Your mind stops racing. In that moment, the belief feels correct, not because it has been tested, but because your body has relaxed. The brain trusts the body more than logic. Calm also shuts down vigilance. Vigilance is expensive. It burns energy. When the brain senses calm, it turns vigilance off. Turning vigilance off feels like relief. Relief feels like confirmation. This is why anxious thoughts feel threatening even when they are accurate. They raise arousal. Raised arousal feels unsafe. The brain reacts by rejecting or avoiding those thoughts, not because they are wrong, but because they disrupt calm. At night, this mechanism becomes stronger. Emotional resources are depleted. The nervous system is tired. Anything that raises arousal feels intolerable. The brain aggressively seeks calm. Whatever produces calm gets labeled safe. Psychologists refer to this as affect heuristic. People judge the safety or truth of something based on how it makes them feel. Calm equals good. Tension equals bad. This happens automatically and unconsciously. This is not limited to beliefs. It applies to people, routines, and environments. Familiar places feel safer because they produce calm. Familiar people feel trustworthy because they reduce arousal. Predictability lowers nervous system activation. Lower activation feels like safety. The validating part is that this system usually works. In many situations, calm really does follow safety, but in modern life, calm can be manufactured. Distraction, reassurance, denial, simplification. These can all produce calm without resolving danger. The brain does not differentiate. It was not designed for abstract threats like existential uncertainty or long-term consequences. It responds to immediate internal state. This is why some people stay in harmful situations that feel calm. The absence of acute arousal tricks the brain into perceiving safety. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar uncertainty, because uncertainty raises arousal. At night, when the brain is preparing for sleep, safety becomes the top priority. Sleep requires disengagement. Disengagement requires trust. Trust requires calm. Anything that disrupts calm is treated as a threat, even if it is true. This is why the mind softens reality before sleep. It reframes, it reassures, it minimizes. Not to be dishonest, but to create a calm internal environment. Calm tells the brain it is safe to let go. You may notice that in the morning, some nighttime beliefs feel flimsy. Calm fades. Skepticism returns. That does not mean the calm was fake. It means the brain was operating under a different priority. Understanding this changes how you relate to your own certainty. When something feels true because it calms you, you can pause and recognize the mechanism. Calm is influencing judgment. This does not mean calm is bad. Calm is essential. Without it, the nervous system would burn out. But calm is not evidence. It is a signal. And like all signals, it can be misleading. Humans equate calm with safety because for most of our evolutionary history, that equation kept us alive. But in a world of abstract fears and complex truths, the equation still runs even when it no longer fits perfectly. At night especially, the brain chooses calm over clarity. It chooses safety over accuracy. That choice is not a flaw. It is a prioritization. Sleep is a biological necessity. Calm is the doorway to sleep. So the brain learns to treat calm as safety without question. Once you see this, you begin to understand why certain beliefs feel strongest when you are tired. They are not reinforced by evidence. They are reinforced by relief. The brain does not ask, "Is this true?" It asks, "Am I calm?" If the answer is yes, it assumes you are safe. And when the brain believes you are safe, it finally allows you to rest. The role of storytelling in mental shutdown. The mind does not shut down by going silent. It shuts down by telling itself a story. Not a dramatic one. A simple one. A beginning, a middle, and an implied end. That is how mental shutdown actually works. Storytelling is not entertainment for the brain. It is a shutdown sequence. When the day is unfinished, the brain hates open loops, unanswered questions, unresolved emotions, contradictions. These keep neural circuits active. Activity means alertness. Alertness blocks rest. Storytelling closes loops even when reality has not. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The brain would rather accept a coherent story than an accurate one if coherence allows it to rest. At the end of the day, your experiences are messy. Mixed signals, half decisions, emotional leftovers. If the brain tried to hold all of that raw, sleep would be impossible. So it compresses. It edits. It arranges meaning where there may be none. This is where storytelling comes in. The mind says today was hard, but it makes sense. Or I did my best. Or things are moving somewhere even if I cannot see it yet. These are not conclusions. They are narratives. They organize chaos into something that feels complete enough to pause. Neurologically, this matters because unresolved information keeps the default mode network active. That network is involved in rumination and self-reflection. Rumination keeps the brain online. Storytelling reduces rumination by offering a temporary explanation. The explanation does not need to be perfect. It needs to be satisfying. Stories give emotional containment. They put edges around experience. Without edges, feelings sprawl. With edges, feelings settle. A story gives the brain a sense of shape. Shape allows closure. You can feel this when you replay the day without a story. It feels scattered. You jump from moment to moment. Anxiety rises. Now compare that to when you frame the day as a chapter. Tough day, learning day, transitional phase. The emotional charge drops. That drop is the goal. The brain is not trying to deceive you. It is trying to down-regulate. Humans have always used stories this way. Myths, religions, personal narratives. They are not just meaning-making tools. They are nervous system regulators. They help people sleep in an uncertain world. At night, this function becomes explicit. The brain is preparing to shut down sensory input and consciousness. To do that, it needs reassurance that nothing urgent remains unresolved. Stories provide that reassurance. This is why vague but comforting narratives are so powerful. Everything happens for a reason. This struggle will make sense later. I am where I need to be. These statements wrap uncertainty in meaning. Meaning reduces threat. Threat keeps the brain awake. Meaning softens threat. There is also a memory component. During sleep, the brain consolidates memory. It prefers organized material. Storytelling organizes memory into themes instead of fragments. This makes consolidation easier. Easier consolidation supports sleep. The validating part is that this is not delusion. It is compression. Just like files are zipped to save space, experiences are stored to save energy. The details are still there. They are just not active. This is why some truths resurface in the morning. The story fades. Analysis returns. But that does not mean the story was wrong. It served a different function at a different time. People who struggle with insomnia often lack a shutdown story. Their minds keep presenting raw data, unfiltered emotion, competing interpretations. The brain cannot disengage because nothing feels finished. This is also why journaling or talking things out before bed can help. You are not solving the problem. You are creating a narrative container, Once the story exists, the mind can rest. Storytelling also protects identity. Without a story, experiences threaten to redefine you unpredictably. A story preserves continuity. It says, "This fits into who I am." Continuity reduces anxiety. At night, identity stability matters. Instability feels dangerous. Stories stabilize. The danger only appears when stories become rigid and permanent, when they block growth. But temporary nighttime stories are not about belief. They are about shutdown. The brain knows it cannot carry the full weight of reality 24 hours a day. It needs pauses. Stories create those pauses. Understanding this changes how you treat your own nighttime thoughts. When you catch yourself narrating your life into something simpler, you do not need to correct it immediately. You can recognize it as a biological process. The mind is not avoiding truth, it is preparing for rest. Storytelling is the bridge between wakefulness and sleep. It allows the brain to step away without feeling irresponsible. It creates the illusion of resolution long enough for consciousness to dim. Without stories, the mind would stay awake trying to finish a day that never really ends. With stories, the brain can say this chapter is closed for now, and that is all sleep really needs. Not certainty, not solutions, just a story complete enough to let go, believing you're not alone. Even when you are, there is a strange comfort that shows up when the lights go out and the noise fades. You might be physically alone. No messages, no voices, no one sitting beside you. And yet, your mind reaches for a feeling instead of a fact. I am not alone. That belief settles something deep in the body, even when logic knows better. Humans are not built to feel alone and stay calm. For most of our evolutionary history, being alone meant danger. Isolation meant vulnerability. Safety came from proximity, from knowing someone else was nearby, watching, sharing the load. That wiring never left. It just adapted. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The brain does not require actual presence to feel accompanied. It only requires the perception of connection. When that perception exists, the nervous system relaxes. When it does not, vigilance increases. This is why loneliness hurts physically. It is not just sadness, it is threat activation. The brain interprets isolation as risk. Heart rate increases. Sleep becomes lighter. Thoughts race. The body prepares for something to go wrong, so the mind intervenes. Believing you are not alone is a regulatory response. It might take the form of imagining someone thinking about you, remembering a supportive figure, feeling connected to a larger story, a community, a belief system, or even an audience you cannot see. These are not fantasies for entertainment. They are tools for survival. Neurologically, perceived social support reduces activity in threat circuits. Studies show that simply thinking about a trusted person lowers stress responses. The brain reacts as if help is available, even when it is not physically present. Availability matters more than proximity. At night, this mechanism becomes especially important. Darkness reduces sensory input. Silence amplifies internal states. Without distraction, the feeling of being alone can intensify quickly. The mind counters this by activating relational representations. You may replay conversations. Imagine what someone would say to you. Feel watched over. Feel part of something bigger. These experiences are not random. They are the brain recreating social safety internally. This is why people talk to themselves at night, or sleep with background noise, or leave a light on, or scroll through familiar faces online. These behaviors reduce perceived isolation. Reduced isolation equals reduced threat. The validating part is that this does not mean you are weak or dependent. It means your nervous system is functioning normally. Social connection is as fundamental as food or rest. When it is missing externally, the brain compensates internally. Believing you are not alone also stabilizes identity. Alone, the sense of self can feel unanswered. Connection reflects you back to yourself. Even imagined connection does this. It says you exist in relation to something. That reduces existential anxiety. This belief often shows up in subtle ways. Thinking someone would understand how you feel. Believing someone out there has gone through something similar. Feeling part of a shared human experience. These thoughts reduce the sense of isolation without requiring direct interaction. At night, this is crucial. Existential thoughts are louder when distractions are gone. Questions about meaning, purpose, and belonging surface easily. Feeling alone in those questions can trigger anxiety. Feeling accompanied, even abstractly, softens them. This is why spiritual beliefs, parasocial relationships, and collective identities often intensify at night. They provide a sense of presence. Presence creates safety. Safety allows sleep. The brain is not checking for accuracy here. It is checking for regulation. Does this belief lower arousal? Does it reduce the feeling of threat? If yes, it is accepted. You may notice that in the morning, the sense of connection fades or changes. That does not mean it was fake. It was state-dependent. It served its purpose when your nervous system needed it most. There is also a protective element. Fully confronting aloneness requires emotional strength. At night, that strength is lower. The mind delays that confrontation by creating connection. Again, not denial. Timing. Understanding this changes how you judge your nighttime thoughts. When you feel comforted by the idea that someone is with you in some way, you do not need to dismiss it as childish. You can recognize it as a biological response to isolation cues. Humans are social organisms. Our brains are designed to assume company. When company is missing, the system fills the gap. Believing you are not alone is not about rejecting reality. It is about creating enough safety to rest. Without that safety, the brain stays alert. Alert brains do not sleep. So when you feel that quiet reassurance late at night, even in an empty room, understand what is happening. Your mind is protecting you from the ancient fear of being left unguarded in the dark. It is saying you are held. You are connected. You are not facing the night entirely on your own. Not because someone is physically there, but because the human brain refuses to rest unless it believes, in some form, that you belong somewhere. And sometimes, that belief is all it takes to finally let go. Why meaning is more soothing than accuracy. There is a moment when facts stop helping. You understand what happened. You know why it happened. You can explain it clearly, and yet your chest still feels tight. Your mind still feels restless. That is the moment meaning steps in. Meaning soothes where accuracy cannot. Accuracy tells you what is true. Meaning tells you what to do with it. The human brain is not comforted by information alone. It is comforted by coherence, by a sense that events fit into a larger pattern that makes emotional sense. When something painful or confusing happens, raw accuracy often increases distress. It adds detail without reducing uncertainty. Here is the uncomfortable truth. A perfectly accurate explanation can still feel unbearable if it offers no meaning. Knowing that something happened randomly, senselessly, or without purpose does nothing to calm the nervous system. In many cases, it makes things worse. The brain is constantly asking a deeper question than is this correct? It is asking, what does this mean for me, for my future, for my safety, for who I am? Accuracy rarely answers those questions. Meaning does. Neurologically, this matters because uncertainty activates threat circuits. When the brain cannot predict outcomes or understand significance, it stays alert. Alertness blocks rest. Meaning reduces uncertainty by framing experience within a narrative. Even if the narrative is not fully accurate, it provides emotional orientation. You can feel this difference when comparing two explanations for the same event. One is factual but empty. This happened because of random chance. The other offers meaning. This happened to teach me something. The first may be true. The second may be debatable. But the second soothes more because it gives the mind somewhere to stand. Meaning creates psychological closure. It answers the question why in a way that reduces emotional tension. The brain relaxes not because it has perfect information, but because it has an interpretation it can live with. This is especially important at night. When the mind is tired, it cannot hold complexity well. Accuracy often requires holding multiple variables, contradictions, and unknowns. Meaning simplifies. Simplification lowers cognitive load. Lower load allows shutdown. Psychologists have long observed that humans are meaning-making creatures. We instinctively create stories that link cause, effect, and purpose. These stories regulate emotion. Without them, experience feels fragmented and threatening. The validating part is that this is not stupidity or denial. It is regulation. The brain prioritizes emotional stability over factual precision when resources are low. That priority keeps you functional. This is why people often gravitate toward beliefs that explain suffering in purposeful terms. Growth, fate, lessons. These beliefs do not erase pain, but they reduce chaos. Chaos is what overwhelms the nervous system. Accuracy often leaves chaos intact. It says this happened because of complex systems, chance, and variables beyond control. That may be true, but it offers no emotional anchor. Meaning provides an anchor even when the ground is shaky. There is also an identity component. Meaning helps preserve a stable sense of self. It integrates experiences into a coherent story about who you are and where you are going. Accuracy can threaten identity by highlighting randomness or lack of control. At night, identity stability matters. Instability feels dangerous. Meaning stabilizes by saying this fits into a larger arc. That arc allows the mind to rest. This is why confronting harsh truths without meaning often leads to insomnia. The facts may be clear, but without a framework, the nervous system stays activated. Meaning reduces activation by offering context. Over time, people often revise meanings. As capacity grows, meanings become more nuanced and accurate. But in moments of exhaustion, the brain chooses what soothes now, not what is perfectly precise. Understanding this changes how you treat your own beliefs. When you notice yourself reaching for meaning that feels softer than reality, you do not need to immediately dismantle it. You can recognize it as a temporary support. Meaning is not the enemy of truth. It is a bridge. It allows you to carry truth without breaking under its weight. Accuracy matters for decisions, growth, and change. Meaning matters for survival, rest, and emotional integration. The brain knows when to prioritize each. At night, especially, the priority is regulation. Meaning regulates better than accuracy. It quiets the nervous system. It closes loops. It reduces existential noise. This is why a simple story can calm you more than a detailed explanation. The story gives shape. Shape gives containment. Containment gives peace. Eventually, truth can be revisited, refined, expanded, but rest must come first. The brain does not reject accuracy because it is weak. It sets accuracy aside because it is tired. Meaning is more soothing than accuracy because meaning tells the nervous system that life, however messy, is still understandable enough to pause. And sometimes, that pause is exactly what keeps you going.